we have planned for you guys today is really an opportunity to gain practical knowledge of how do we put things into practice in the field. My goal with all of you is to answer questions. I want you guys to be able to ask questions. If you feel that there's a question throughout the day or something just pops into your head, please raise your hand, ask it. In a little bit, I will have Martine come up here and we're going to write questions down on the board. And then he's also going to write his phone number on there so that you can text him a question throughout the whole process of today, and he can write it up there and we'll be able to answer that. So this is very much an interactive format. We want you guys to be able to ask questions. We want your minds to be going, and we want you guys to have fun and be able to make use of a lot of this information. So one of the things that we at California Ag Solutions really focus on is really trying to improve the soil, to improve a plant, which leads to healthier crops and ultimately a thriving family. So when you look at the progression of what we're after, is all of the things in our society really start with a healthy soil. And we can go back to every single society that you can think of that is based in great increase, where they have done really well. Their civilizations rise and fall based on their soil. And if we take care of the soil, every other part of their society has done well. And I think that's a good testament to what's happening now. We have poorer quality food than we ever have. We have other issues that we're struggling with in society. And ultimately, the family is falling apart. And so one of our goals is, how do we help growers? Because most all of us are family operations. We all have families. We're all in a part of a family somehow. But what are the things that we can do to really improve the quality of relationships in our family, quality of relationships within our industry, be able to build and work together? So that is one of the things that I want you guys to walk away with, is we're not just a company selling fertilizer or cover crop seed. We're really looking at the whole picture here of how we can help build relationships, not just in the soil with microbes and plants, which there's a whole nother talk that I know Monte and Keith are going to be talking about, those type of relationships, but it's the relationships we have with each other. How do we help each other? How do we build each other up? And how do we share knowledge? And that's one of the key things that we have here, is we have a lot of really good experience in this room, and I want to be able to let you guys share that with each other. That's why we have very much an open opportunity to ask questions. So, goal to gain practical knowledge. So it's going to be basic, but also at high level all at the same time. If you ask basic questions, great, we'll answer them. If you ask high level questions, we can answer those. But don't feel afraid to ask a question because you think it's too simple. It's amazing where we're all at in our journey, and where some of us who've been in this for a long time still can ask some really basic questions that sometimes can turn into some really deep thought. So the three speakers that we've got here today, Monte, he's a business partner here in California Ag Solutions with me, as well as founder and president of Ag Solutions Network. And we also have Keith Berns here, founder of Green Cover Seeds, and then you've got me. So what's interesting about all three of us is we're also farmers. So we have the experience, we understand what it's like to make these decisions. So we can sit on both sides of the desk when we're having this conversation about plant nutrition, cover crops, soil health. What are we doing? So it's really interesting to be able to have someone that's working with you that can also understand what it's like to be in your boots. So some of those practical knowledge, these are some of the categories. I'm not limiting it to this, but these are some of the things just to get your brains flowing, to get some that mental juice. So we look at soil systems. They're far more complex than we ever know. We may never know the full complexity of them. Although we think we know a lot of things, I think there's a saying, the more you know about something, the more you realize you don't know that much about it. And I think that's very true for all of us. Also, understanding the water cycle. I think most of us all have that challenge here in California, where water is a very big deal. And the more we learn about these systems, we realize how much more efficient they can be beyond where we're currently at. We have a lot of inefficiencies in our current systems, not just mechanically with the irrigation system, but more have to do with biology and how microbes, fungi, and the whole system moves water around. So much more efficiency that we have to gain. That's exciting. And then the value of carbon. We hear about all of this constantly, where it's carbon credits, moving this around. But what's the true value to you as a grower? How does that actually make a financial benefit or an impact on your operation? And then managing a cover crop, especially in today's environment where we've got some challenges with commodity prices or costs of resources. We're going to answer some of those questions and make sure that we can show that there's a value to putting a cover crop in these operations, even when prices don't look that great. So don't be focused on just the expense, but be focused on what the opportunity can be gained from all of this. So there's a quote that most of you know of pasteurization, correct? You see your milk, it's pasteurized. Well, Louis Pasteur is the one who is responsible for really digging into the microbial fermentation process, understanding a lot of the processes of microbiology. He had a huge hand in a lot of the advancements in technology in the medical field, in the ag industry. But one of the quotes that he is really known for is about change. And change only favors minds that are diligently looking and preparing for discovery. So that's one of the things I want you guys to all be thinking about is we are all faced with change on a daily basis. Every single one of us in our operations, wherever we're at, with our families, with our operations, our businesses, even in our political arena, change is all around us. And that's something that we can't change that change, but we know it's going to happen. So how do we keep an open mind, and how are we preparing for that? Don't let change just happen to you. Diligently look for things that are going to keep you ahead of the curve. Diligently look for things in your operation that might make you just ask, why did that happen? It's the skill of observation. I think that's such an important thing that we all need to be looking at is in our operations, with our boots in the ground, boots walking through the field is some of the best things we can do for that field, because we'll see the differences changing. When we make these applications, when we plant a cover crop, we will see changes. Now, how do we start putting that together and putting value in that? So I really want you guys to be thinking of that, because that's going to be something that we will come back to, but keep that in the back of your mind. Think about the discovery. What is it that you can discover? Have an open mind for a lot of these things. So.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit today about what are some things that we can do, and in order to just be more efficient, more cognizant, and in line with our ecosystem. Okay? Who cares about that? I got to farm and make money, right? But how can we align making money with doing what's right by the soil, the community, and the ecosystem? So, all the good catchy titles start out with a number of things that you can do. So I thought, okay, I'll succumb. The top 5 things we need to do less of. Okay. And I try to keep it light and funny. Okay. So I say, how do we not be a moron? As in putting more on, doing more all the time. How can we help the crop, the soil, the ecosystem work for us instead of us having to do everything for it? Okay. The soil is a dynamic living place, and we need to manage it in a way to work for us instead of us having to do everything for it. Because whenever we have to be a moron, that comes with writing more checks and don't always mean more revenues. So the farmer part here, Silas mentioned, we're all farmers. Keith, are you combining right now? Yeah, I'm supposed to be. So anyway, we've had a little dry streak. So the good news is, well, good. I need people for that. How's that sound? We do a lot of research work on the farm, so it's kind of a complicated process, but we're going to be starting next week and looking forward to it. So I believe we can improve the health and wealth of our soils, our plants, our animals, the humans that eat them, both the plants and the animals, and the overall planet or the ecosystem. what God designed for us to steward. And they start in that order. It starts with the soil, and it goes all the way through to our entire planet. And really, I say the biggest thing we need to do is eliminate compaction. Okay, there's this compaction layer. It's about this wide. It's between our ears. It's a 6-inch layer of compaction. And sometimes that compaction is harder than this floor that you're sitting on right now. Okay, and sometimes, I mean, a Wilcox ripper won't even break it. You know, you can put a single shank on a D9 and try to put it through there, and it'll just stop it. So we have to be aware of that's just natural for us as humans. We were designed that way. We were designed to. We get a lot of information thrown at us. Does anybody not get too many phone calls in a day? I mean, are you guys complaining? You wish you got a few more calls? Maybe a few more texts? I mean, you get spam. How many spam texts are you guys getting these days? I'm averaging about 10 a day, and it just kind of keeps going up. Or emails. I know you guys like those, right? You don't get enough of those in a day. So we have that. Think about it when you get the emails. How long does it take you to look at an email that you don't want? Is it less than a second? You're hovering over that delete key. Delete. Okay. So that is a filter we're putting in place. We don't have time. We have to keep the world ordered and in the perspective that we see. So we hit the delete button a lot of times on a lot of information. And it just doesn't allow us to see what's going on in that field. But one of the things I appreciate about spending so much time in the field, whether in a tractor or sprayer or combine, whatever, or walking fields, is it just gives me an opportunity to see and use all of my senses to understand what's going on out there. So what I'm constantly challenging my mind to do is open up and see things where, hey, maybe there is an opportunity for a tillage intervention now and then because I'm a long time no-tiller. Okay, so that's against my paradigm, but I try to look for that. Maybe there's an opportunity to grow something other than corn and soybeans back east, okay, which that's what farmers identify there as. So I'm always challenging myself. I want to encourage you to do the same. And this is a leader, a holistic management practitioner. He says, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make large changes, change the way you see things. So it's really important, once a week, go to one field, put your phone in focus mode, do not disturb, for 15 minutes. Smell, taste, smell, be careful, valley fever, sorry. Don't be digging the soil too much, but smell the plants. Taste them. Make sure you haven't sprayed with paraquat lately, okay? And just use all of your senses to see what's going on in that field and just make it a regular part of your routine to get to know what is happening within your production system. So I've talked a lot about this. It's popular in magazines now. Everyone heard of the 5 soil health principles? Some people say there's 4. Some people say there's 6. Why can't we all get along? Let's just call it 5, okay? Context is one that's been added to make it 6, but context, I argue, is the law, okay? It is the pure law of soil health. You have to farm within your own particular context. So I just kind of put a timeline up here of how CAS has come along and helped farmers adopt these different soil health principles, and when did that begin? And really, the minimizing, I apologize, I can't see this because I'm colorblind. So the top one up there is minimize soil disturbance. That really happened when I was working at Fireball Equipment in 2001. We were preserving beds with Bigham Brothers. That was when the Performer first came out. We were preserving beds. So the Wilcox Eliminator was coming out then. Optimizer from, I forget the company, the big monstrous machine. It takes a 500 horse to pull it. But all of those things were coming in at that moment in time to do less disturbance of the soil. Then we started California Ag Solutions in 2004, and really looking at maximizing the soil cover. So in other words, we're doing less tillage, doing strip till, bed preservation, and those kind of things to where we're leaving some residues on the surface. That was the beginning of that. Continual living roots. We started introducing low growth triticale in processing tomatoes in 2005. And that got to be pretty cool. That's got to be almost a standard practice. Now it's come back a little bit due to water, but that has had a significant influence since then. Increasing the biodiversity, that's when we began looking at multi-species mixes and what can we do there to really push the envelope in the overall diversity that's within a field. And integrating livestock, as crazy as that seems, started here in 2019 with sheep and goats in trees. So it's amazing what has happened and how that's benefited those areas where we've been able to do that. So you guys all remember those 5 principles, right? I'm going to give you a little cheat here. This is for fun. This is how you remember the 5 soil health principles the easy way, okay? So number 1, set a minimize soil disturbance. That means tillage and putting chemicals and fertilizers and everything on there. That's back to our don't be a moron, okay? So don't do more to the field, do less, okay? The second thing is don't farm naked, okay? Keep the soil covered. Nobody wants to see you out there naked. We're talking your soil, okay? Now, what you guys do after hours, I can't tell with this crew. But anyway, the key is just remember, when you see bare ground, that's not good. You don't want to see that dirt. Don't farm dead. That's what I call increasing, the continual living roots, is when we have 365 days here in California. It's a huge advantage compared to anywhere else really in this country that we can grow something. North Dakota, they can grow something for 90 days. I can in Illinois grow something for about 150, 170 days, okay? Here we can grow 365. So the opportunity is to do 2 to 4 times more growth and carbon capture in a year's time than anywhere else. And that's why it's amazed me so much how dramatic of a difference we can make to California soils, because we have this huge growing opportunity. So take advantage of it. Don't farm dead. Finally, diversity. Don't farm boring. We all think, back to the compaction layer up here, we all think that an almond orchard with everything floated and it's all perfectly clean and there's not one blade of grass, not one weed out there anywhere. We think that's perfect. If you went up to the Sierras and all you saw up there was sequoias only and perfectly bare ground in between, would that look right to you? Those sequoias wouldn't be there, right? They're in symbiotic relationships with everything else that's growing there, the thousands of different species, right? So we have to change our perception that when we drive by and we see a weedy field that's cover crops, that's what it should look like, not bare, sterile concrete with some trees poking out of it, okay? And that's a perception thing. And I fight that with, family. You're like, oh, that's not a clean looking field. Or why don't you mow the road banks? I'm trying to give wildlife somewhere to live because we farm everything else, for crying out loud. So I fight that with my mother all the time. She's always mad at me because I don't mow the road banks. So I'm sure you guys never get family pushback, right? No, not in farming. And finally, number 5, don't forget the meat. All right, that's the 5th soil health principle. Don't forget the meat. And the more that you can integrate this, and there's lots of opportunities here in California, tremendous opportunities coming in solar grazing, but grazing within the trees is an amazing opportunity. Goats even don't eat irrigation. Surprising. Sheep don't eat irrigation. We don't really have problems with them. So it's something to consider. And so even if you don't get paid, you're still getting a benefit. So don't get greedy, because you're competing against lush grass when we get rains in the hills, and you're competing against wildfire contracts. So thinking you're going to charge somebody when the state of California will pay them to bring their goats to California lands, think again. The benefit is capturing more carbon, returning natural fertilizer to the soil. So there's lots of opportunities there. All right. Do you care? It's kind of a rough question here. Do you guys care? You bet you do. You really care. You really care about what you do. You care about the land. But let's just ask a question here. I think, where do you draw your care line? I mean, do you care about your business success and profit? I don't think you came here just for tacos today, right? You can get tacos wherever you're at. So you're here to learn how to make your business better and more profitable. Okay, we definitely all pass this. The care line is below here. Do you care about your family? Absolutely. If you don't, your wife will go ahead and take half the farm from you and take it on the way, right? So you definitely care about your family, and you definitely think about that in your decisions and what you're doing. You're trying to improve your land for the future use of you and your family. Now we get a little tougher. Do we care about the whole community? Even those people that vote the wrong way, right? And even those people that aren't supposed to be here, even, everybody in the community. Do we care about them? It can be tough, right? We care about our local community. Do we care about our larger community of people? Do we really care about the ecosystem? We say we do. The Farm Bureau says we do in all the ads they put out. Do we really care? Is our actions, how much do we think about ecosystem impact when we're farming? I'll be honest with you. A few years ago, I didn't. I really didn't. I'm just trying to solve a problem. I'm trying to kill a weed. I'm trying to kill a bug. I'm trying to kill a disease. I'm just out there trying to kill all the time. Why am I doing that? What is the side effects to the ecosystem of that approach? So I've really gotten to think a little bit more about, yes, I'm responsible for what I steward, but it's a part of the entire creation. And what I do impacts all of my neighbors, all of my community, and all of the ecosystem. Since we've really changed how we approach farming here in the last 7, 8 years at our farm and become much more regenerative focused, we now have deer hunters, that are just drooling at the mouth to come hunt on our place because we got these bucks that are monstrous because we have great forages and great mineral content in those forages for them to grow. We have coyotes more than ever on our farm, but they're deterred because we have livestock guardian dogs to keep them away from our animals. We live with them. Think of this, if shooting coyotes worked, we've been shooting them for so long, we surely should have killed them all, right? They don't. Every time you shoot one, they repopulate more. So it's just a lot of those things, observing what's going on and how can we make it better. Bird count, bird diversity, plant diversity, everything is dramatically changing as we leave things alone, as we do less, as we try to let and enable the natural systems to take care of and work for us. So it's a really different mindset. Again, get out the D9 to think this way. And the beautiful part is in almonds, it's a wonderful opportunity to work with these processes because we have a permanent crop. We're not having to turn the land over, prepare it for a different width row, a different farming regime in a rotation. There's opportunities we can do within that permanent context that we can't do in many other crops. So I wanted to show you, I have some inside video here of a farmer working in the season, controlling problems. You can see as they come up, we're in the heat of season here. Oh, there's a bug that came up. Oh, I got the PCA report. Oh, I got to hit that. Oh, I got the rec for this. Oh, that person quit. I got to get somebody new there. That tractor broke down. Oh, I got to fill out something for carb. Oh, I got to do this. I got to do this. You're just constantly whack-a-mole, whack-a-mole, whack-a-mole. Everything's coming up. I got a problem. I'm going to hit it. I got a problem. I'm going to hit it. Right? This is what it can feel like farming. Anyone identify with this? I mean, it's just like constant. I mean, that guy needs a bigger hammer. That's all there is to it, right? You need a bigger hammer. But I think, go ahead and come back to the slideshow. But I mean, that's kind of the feeling that you can get in the heat of season, right? So how do you win at whack-a-mole farming, right? Do we need a bigger hammer? We need new products. Oh, the hope of new products. New products are great. They're going to save us. If new products were going to save us, they would have saved us the last 70 years because guess what? Every year we have a new product, okay? Maybe it's more modes of action. We need more modes of action because they become resistant to the old modes, so let's get the new modes. We get the new modes, what do you think they're going to do? Become resistant. Then we have to have new modes again. Or we have to gene edit, and we have to modify, and we have to breed resistance. All these things. Is it kind of the same movie over and over again? We need to go higher rates. You know, if some is good, yeah, more is better. Or we have to do it more often. We have to spray more often because we're seeing resistance or more virulence. Okay. When you spray an insecticide, what happens? Does the likelihood of mite reduce or increase? Increase. Why? We just killed all their predators, right? So when you pull that trigger, now we just created another mold pop up. Then we got to hit that one. Then another one comes up. We got to hit that one. It's just this constant. Once we start it, we're just on that whack-a-mole treadmill. Maybe we need an automatic hammer with an extended magazine. That's what we need for whack-a-mole farming, right? Technology is going to save us. Drones, eye vision software, AI, robots, automation, it's going to save us, right? All technology is doing today, and I'm very, very disappointed about it. And I talk about this on the podcast some, but I can't let it all out. I might not have anybody ever listen again. Technology today is focused on just making the conventional system incrementally better. Technology has an amazing ability to step back and make regenerative farming possible. Because typically regenerative farming is more management intense, which is an awesome application for artificial intelligence. And it's typically more labor intense, which is an awesome application for robotics and automation. So as we get these companies, and there's some companies out there we have an opportunity to invest in that are really doing great things to enable, using technology to enable regenerative farming and soil health practices. Here's my question, and this is the compaction layer we got to break. Why not prevent those moles from sticking their heads up? Why are we focusing on killing the moles instead of, and I'm not talking about the real ones that you have problems with in your orchards. I realize we're back to the whack-a-mole game here. Why don't we prevent them suckers from even being there in the game? So we're not just sitting there constantly hammering away, and let the game and let it play itself. One of my favorite quotes, and you see it often, what did me in is what I did not know is what I knew that just wasn't so. We have a lot of false assumptions as an individual, as a farm, as an industry. We think a lot of things that just maybe aren't true. The hardest thing to do is unlearn things. One of the hardest people that we have to hire here for customer account representatives is PCA. Why? We have to unprogram them and reprogram them. It's actually easier for us typically to be just outside the industry. So, crop advisor, seed advisor, those kind of things we have the most success with, or equipment, because we don't have to unprogram the things that they thought they knew that were not so. All right, so you listen to the preaching section here. Now we'll get into the nuts and bolts. So the top 5 things that we can do less of, okay? And this is, I've seen it dramatically at my own farm. I've seen it across from Montana to Pennsylvania to Texas, Kansas, California. These are some very universal truths that we really need to take a hard look at, okay? Number 1, nitrogen. We said earlier, if some is good, more is gooder, okay? Maybe that's not true. What do we tell ourselves when it comes to nitrogen? Is that fair? You guys ever tell yourself that? It's cheap, right? 50, 80 cents a unit, depending on the year, how much they think they can gouge you for, right? So it's cheap, it's easy, right? You just inject it in the water, no big deal. Nutrient company brings it out, we pour it out, and of course, you're going to put on nitrogen, just run that pump wide open, get it out in an hour and be done, right? That's the way to do it. No, Should put it out over the entire set for distribution uniformity. And the other thing is fear. Most fertilizer, no matter where you are, is sold on fear. We don't want to run out. Ooh, if we run out, I don't want to run out. We might not get yield. What would we do? So typically we are over-applying. I don't matter what crop it is. Nationwide, we are really over-applying. What does the industry tell us? I got some slides on that, and what do universities tell us? So you have to have the economic right. You have to make sure you maximize your yield potential. But again, current agriculture is looking at things within silos. Guess what the scientist who studies nitrogen studies? Nitrogen. There's a separate guy in the same university that's in charge of basically potassium, and then there's the phosphorus guy. And the three of them never really talk to each other. Iowa State, University of Illinois. I mean, it's interesting to see they're just so siloed that they don't look at the whole system. So you guys have probably all seen these graphs. If you went to college, you had to read them and understand them and such like that. The couple different terms, maximum return to nitrogen or the economic optimum nitrogen rate. Your nitrogen rate goes up at a fixed line, but yield hits a curve, it hits a plateau, and then once it hits that plateau, one more unit of nitrogen is not going to get you one more unit of yield value, so there's where you need to be. Right? Everybody's seen this before? Old news? Still got you? So looking at that, so if on this maximum economic nitrogen rate, if 32 is 50 cents per unit of N, I realize it might be a little low. I'm just making it for easy math, okay? And let's say almonds are 2 pounds, which is a little low, too low, right? It needs to be higher, but easy math again. We're going to put nitrogen out there until that last pound of nuts comes with 4 pounds of nitrogen. That's the same thing. A bushel of corn is roughly 10 units of, we'll put out 10 units of nitrogen to get that last bushel of corn at $5. That's the mentality of that, right? You've all heard this before. Now, I'm going to ask you to really, really think through this with me. You have a 3,000 pound almond crop. Would you put 12,000 units of N on per acre on a 3,000 pound almond crop? Because if it took going from 2,999 pounds, if it took 4 units of nitrogen, I'm going to spend $2 of nitrogen to get $2 of almonds. This is the industry and university mantra. I'm spending that 4 units to get that last pound to take me up to 3,000 pounds. So if I'm willing to spend it there, that's the equivalent of putting on that much rate on the entire crop. 12,000 pounds of nitrogen just seems absolutely ridiculous, don't it? But that's the equivalent rate that you're applying to get that last pound. See how inefficient that is? You have to let this sink in. Are you guys catching this? It's a little bit different way to think. But look at the inefficiency to get that last pound of almonds when we're pushing to that very, very end. Okay? We know it doesn't take 12,000 pounds. How many pounds of nitrogen? Do I have it up there? Okay, good. How many pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 pounds of almonds does it take? If your CCA can't answer. Huh? Real close. 60. It's a range. It goes from like 55 to 70, 68 plus or minus 3 pounds. Okay? And that's in a well-managed, evenly, a crop that's even and doesn't have any other nutritional deficiencies. So how many people are growing 5,000 pound crops every year on every acre? Just the neighbor that you see at the church or something, he got that yield, right? He didn't, but he says he did. Bless him, bless his heart. So if you look at that, we should really be no more than 204 pounds on a 3,000 pound crop. Are we growing 3,000 pounds consistently? I think that's tough to do. 5,000 pounds is roughly the solar maximum of it. We have 20% sunlight to the ground. 4,000 on a well-managed, well-even orchard is really about potential max, year in, year out. So how many people are putting on more than 204 pounds of nitrogen on their almonds? Most. Maybe not this last year. Probably the first time, right? Because market prices. Or maybe the last 2 years. So what I'm getting at is we need to be thinking not necessarily how do we squeeze out that last pound with nitrogen. We need to be thinking about what is that last pound of nitrogen really costing us. So when we really push the envelope on nitrogen, here's the 4 fates of excess nitrogen. Let me know which one of these is good. First off, it goes to the atmosphere. Okay? Volatilization, ammonia gas is off, or it denitrifies, it's the loss as nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide, 283 times more potent than carbon dioxide as greenhouse gas. No matter what you think about greenhouse gases, it's just not good. If it's going to the atmosphere, you spend it for nothing. Okay? If you think a lot of greenhouse gases, it's a big problem. The second fate of excess nitrogen to the soil. Okay? It burns off carbon in the soil. Who wants more carbon in their soil? Is it a pest? Is that something we need to get out the whack-a-mole hammer and just get rid of that carbon? It's terrible. It's just killing us. Anyone complained about having, if you ever had excess soil carbon come up on a soil test, it has a range and it says too high. You might, when you get in the +10 category in peat ground, okay? But there's not a lot of almonds in peat ground. So we're always carbon deficient. We're always looking to improve carbon here because we have high pH, we have high salts, we have a growing season all year, and we irrigate. And we have amazing UV potential in sunlight in California. Those 5 things make it extraordinarily hard to keep carbon in the soil. So we're starting out having to really fight for it. But every time we put on excess nitrogen, it's just like lighting up a cutting torch and just burning it out of the ground. Microbes fire up and they're looking to balance that nitrogen with carbon. And they go after long-term organic matter and burn it out of your soil. So it's a great way to get rid of carbon. If your carbon excess, apply extra nitrogen, it'll take care of it for you. Okay? To the stream. Okay, so we've had it go up, we've had it burn off carbon here, runoff. I realize a lot of farms here, we capture our tailwater and such, but not everywhere. It runs off to the stream. What happens when it runs off to the stream? Algae blooms, we get blue-green algae and poisoning. We get dead zones, eutrophic zones. It's a real mess. It's a real problem, okay? And if a city or somewhere gets their drinking water source from that stream, it's a real problem to detoxify it there. So that can be a real problem. But here's the worst problem, and you know what happens here in the Central Valley is it goes to the groundwater, especially as we go just north of here and we get into real sandy areas that have had a history of manure for a long period of time or have a history of farming for a long time. There's a lot of legacy in that's going to groundwater. That's where blue baby syndrome comes from and birth defects. If you listen to the podcast, Seth Watkins talks about the impact on his family. Both of his son and his daughter were born with very rare genetic disorders. And it came down to the fact that it was their water source that had been contaminated with nitrates that caused his kids to be that way. So the care line, we care about ourselves, we care about our family. Do we care about Seth's family? We need to be thinking about everything we do can affect other families downstream from us. And we all want it. I know farmers, we want to do the right thing. Oh, other things, kidney, spleen, thyroid damage, respiratory, reproductive system damage. There's no problem with birth rates today, right? Cancer, that's at an all-time low now, right? So all of these things have an impact on our ecosystem and on our community. So now here's some other fun things that excess N creates. Excessive vegetative growth. Do you guys make money selling firewood or selling almonds? Trick question. I know there's a lot of trees coming out these days, yes. No, it's from the nut. And excessive vegetative growth, we need some for new fruit wood and new bud, new spurs. But we'll get a poor shape and weak limb structure. Excessive vegetative growth will lead to lower canopy dieback because we create a more humid environment in there. We don't allow air circulation. We can't get sun to the lower limbs. We can't fight the bread molds and such in a way when we overgrow the plant. Also, excessive nitrogen creates lower carbon status within the plant. Okay? So one of the things, and tomatoes, we love tomatoes because they're great to experiment with. The tomatoes growing vegetatively, and when we can't get it to flower, you know, one of the quickest ways that we can change a tomato to fruiting, we put carbon on it, put sugar on it. 10 to 20 pounds of sugar instantly will start setting fruit because it has too much nitrogen in it. So nitrogen is antithesis to carbon. If we have excess carbon in the plant or excess nitrogen in the plant, what do we have? Typically, lower carbon in the plant. Lower carbon is lower Brix. Lower Brix, is that more disease resistant or less disease resistant? As sugars decrease and as plant compounds decrease, is it more or less disease resistant? Less, that's right. So it becomes more susceptible to plant tissue diseases, becomes more susceptible to insect pressure. So now, not only if you polluted the atmosphere, if your neighbor, not you, your neighbor overdid nitrogen, they polluted the atmosphere, they burnt the carbon out of the soil, they ran it off to a stream, they blue baby syndromed, then they created a plant that has lower tissue status, it's got weak limb structure, less bearing points, and it has more susceptible to plant tissue disease and insect pressure. Sounds like a great thing to do. And you spent money to do it because you're afraid that you're going to lose yield. So here's some things. Avoiding excess N. Leaves to storage, okay? So this time of year, and I want you guys to be really careful of this with the hot streak that we have had. We have a lot of trees that don't have as much leaves on them this year as normal, right? And plus we haven't spent as much on trees this year as normal typically. So how much does photosynthetic activity happen when the leaves are off the trees? Not much. Takes leaves to have photosynthesis. So if we run a whole bunch of nitrogen this time of year on an orchard that doesn't have leaves that are actively functioning, how much of that nitrogen stored in the roots? None. Have to be actively photosynthetic to store it in the roots. And then once it's in the roots, then it's used next year. So putting on a lot of nitrogen in the fall can be a problem, especially this year. And then what's the fate of the nitrogen before? All not good. So the other key point is I don't know if you knew this or you remember this, but at bloom, 100% of the nitrogen that goes to support bloom comes first from root storage until root storage is depleted. Then it goes to soil, bringing it in from the soil. It's just like a switch. Once the nitrogen's out of the root stores, then it goes to soil acquisition. Why is that? Tree's lazy. It's easier to get it from root stores than it is to get the microbial associations and the mass flow to bring it in against the concentration gradient into the plant. So timing is everything. And here again is your tax dollars have paid for this wonderful research that Dr. Patrick Brown did. And funny story, he'd just come out with this when we designed our almond program. So just by dumb luck, we didn't have to redesign our almond program. We did it based on his research of total nutrient uptake. But you look at, essentially, we're taking, this is harvest here. You can see all the nutrients that are removed in nuts. Then we mobilize from the trees, leaves into the root zone, roughly 35 pounds, as long as we have the leaves. Then in the spring, once again, we take it out of a month after solstice, essentially, is when it starts mobilizing. And then we'll start to use some soil-based in the middle of March. Now, those will vary a few weeks depending on where you're at in the valley. But those kind of things are important. We want to time that application to make sure we're not putting on too much, too far ahead, or too late, because there's a period of time it takes to get into the soil and into the plant, which will work with you on those kind of things to make sure that we're doing it right and doing it judiciously. Because to the degree we don't do it right, then guess what? We got to be a moron. We have to put more on to hit those tissue tests that we're hoping to hit. And when is the ideal time to tissue test now? Used to be here. Now it's, did I back up too far here? So that way we have a chance to respond to change those prior to maximum need for the tree. Optimum is optimum. There's nothing good about excess applications, and excess creates costs through the rest of the production system. So I just can't beat this drum enough. All right, enough about nitrogen. Let's talk about some other cool stuff. The number 2 thing we can do less of is fungicides and insecticides. Why do you spray fungicides? Is it because we got up in the spring, we put the quarters in the whack-a-mole machine, and here it comes? Time to spray them. It's bloom spray time. It even has its own name, bloom spray. Is it because, this is for fun now, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. Your PCA and your chemical retailer is poor and needs a stimulus check, right? They need, there's some major revenue associated with these things. Or maybe you really like the ads that pop up constantly on your phone for stuff, or you get to listen to it on KMJ. Those are really cool. Ray Appleton talking about what you need to kill what. Or it's the billboards on 99. And how many of the billboards are chemicals? Really? Between here and Fresno, about every other billboard is for some chemical, right? Or maybe here's the other reason to spray fungicides. You're making so much money, you need the write-off, right?
That's so true.
That is true. Exactly. These last few years, it's just been amazing. Or could it be, I created a condition that requires the use of a fungicide. I fed the mole, so now I got to whack it. Or maybe it's all of the above. You like to support the community and whack the moles. So I want to start with the key concept, the pathogen and pest triangle. And I always think about this in the back of my mind when I have a problem. I always bounce back to this to think about, what can I do to affect the host, the pathogen or pest, or the environment? What can I do to constantly change those dynamics? Because if I can change one of them, I've changed that whole need to apply a pesticide. So the host, we're going to walk through first on the host. Here's some things we can do on the host. We can change the mineral status. We can change the phenology, which is the growth pattern of that plant. We can change the brick status of that plant. And we can change the overall nutrient balance within that plant to really help us resist disease. And there's some pretty exciting things we've been able to do in the past. Mineral status. As an example, calcium. And this is why the timing of calcium is so important during leaf initiation and when we're first sending new growth out, is we want that in there to be able to form these really strong surface cells on the cell wall, excuse me. A fun fact also in dairy forages, if we can have cell walls made from calcium instead of magnesium, they're more digestible to a cow. It's the same research we found when we did a lot of dairy forage research. So that also makes it more resistant to certain mold spores and also more resistant. It's harder to chew on insects. So just mineral balance and mineral timing can be a real key to getting resistance to the plant. Mineral status, this is kind of a fun one. We'll pick on manganese. We work hard to have good loose soil, right? That's oxygenated. And almost every nutrient out there comes into a plant easier with oxygen, except for one, and that's manganese. Manganese prefers to be in a reduced form, MnO2, versus MnO4, which is an oxidized form. So what? Well, the big difference is the plant can't use the oxidized form. So any place that we have pH is greater than 7, dry soils with high porosity and a lot of calcium carbonate, or in sandy soils, we have a manganese deficiency. Do you guys know anywhere around here that has greater than pH 7, that has dry soils that have high porosity and lots of calcium carbonate or bicarbonate in it, or might be sandy? Is there anything like that here in California? So we have, by our very nature, a problem with manganese uptake. So that's one of the things we address in our production program to make sure that doesn't happen. So this here is a picture from Purdue University, different places. You can see the different test strips out here that are manganese deficient. And when they were manganese deficient, here it caused a take-all disease in wheat. Okay, so it relates a lot to the plant's immune system, its ability to respond to or create amino acids and signal markers to respond to diseases. So if you're deficient in a certain nutrient, you've compromised your immune system. Okay, lack of manganese is like AIDS for a plant. It just cannot respond. Oh, guess what? It's really good at tying up manganese and zinc. Glyphosate. So in addition to all these bad soil things, we've sprayed glyphosate on there to maybe kill the cover crop, kill weeds, those kind of things. Now we've tied up manganese. But I know I got the whack-a-mole hammer out. I can fix it. I'll put manganese with my Roundup spray. Congratulations, you just tied up your Roundup and you got rid of your manganese at the same time. You missed both moles. Those need to be in separate applications. In fact, the timing of those applications has to be such that it can process through the plant and then apply the manganese afterwards. So typically 5 to 10 days after glyphosate application, a foliar of manganese and zinc is great. Zinc actually scavenges the glyphosate out, manganese restores what's needed. So that's why we do that. And that's why we've even had a few calls where someone accidentally, you guys have probably never heard this, but maybe your neighbor workers accidentally put glyphosate in the fan sprayer. That's pretty cool. There are some things nutritionally we can do. If we know quick enough, we can put pit stop in there and foliar apply and do that tie-up process before we translocate to the roots. But you got a very limited amount of time to do that. And it chemically works. It's not going to be 100%, but it's not going to be dead. So there's a lot of things we can do, and we have to be aware of that. Nutrient balance. Mulder's chart. Anyone seen these before? Got it all memorized? Yep. So the thing that's interesting about Mulder's chart is there's more antagonisms than there's complements on it. What's that mean? Well, if you're a moron in any one of the other places, you've created a problem in the others. More is not always better. Back to pick on nitrogen. Oh, we spent a little on nitrogen this year because it's cheap, but I didn't really want to put that potassium sulfate out because that's expensive. Whoops. Antagonistic, excess nitrogen ties up potassium. Didn't mean to do that. Oh, wait a minute, excess nitrogen ties up boron. Do almonds need potassium or boron? Is that important? Just a little, right? Or look at the stimulation. Manganese has a beneficial relationship right here with potassium. It stimulates the uptake. So we have a soil that's poor in it. We spray glyphosate on it, and we're at a manganese deficient area. We've also then caused to not be as efficient at potassium uptake. You ever heard that before? You want more potassium, spray manganese? Are you getting that on a regular basis, getting that feedback? So those are the things that we look at with a balanced nutrition program. Back again, moron is not gooder. That's all you got to remember. Moron is not gooder. If you say that in public, people will wonder about you. Okay, but it's a good way for you to remember. Brix levels. Talk a little bit about Brix. It can be driven by variety and rootstock. There's not enough research out there on Brix. There's a lot of people talking about it, a lot of things, positive interactions. But I found this interesting, and this is from a while ago, 2007, and this is on apricot. But look at the difference in Brix just by rootstock. found that to be interesting. So there's things that are going on there. We do know that when we foliar apply, fast track, and draft, that we will see a spike in bricks in leaf tissue. Really improves insect and fungicide resistance. We'll talk a little bit more about bricks in a little bit. Phenology, I had to put this in. Martine, thank you. Took this picture. 90 days apart on this. So this is what can happen when we can express a tree like that. Do you see long, lanky? We got a little bit there, but this is a nice balanced tree that's creating great structure for the future. There's things that we can do, and we do it consistently with nutrition by not doing excess nitrogen, by looking at balanced approaches to nutrition and carbon to grow plants in an amazing way, set them up for better yield in the future. So what can we change about pathogens? We can lower the load and we can create competition. Everything's a meal for something else. So a bear is chasing you in the mountains. How do you avoid getting eaten? Yeah, you got to run faster than your friend. That's right. Exactly. You got to run faster than your friend. So everything is a meal for something else. Keep that in mind. Whenever I have a problem with a disease or an insect, I think, what is it that eats this? That's the first thing I go to, not what kills it, what eats it. Keep that in mind. Think about what eats it and build a system that has that out there, because competition and environment really drive this diversity. What can we do about the environment? The final thing. And Andrew, we were having a great conversation about this earlier, but we can moderate soil and canopy temperatures with cover crops. And that completely changes the environment. You're saying a 40 or 50 degree swing between with and without cover crops on the soil temperature. It was like 95 versus 140 or 150. Medium well. I remember medium well. Yeah, versus still rare. Okay. But cover crop residues on the surface, also fast track and draft foliars reduce stress and improve ET efficiency when we deliver potassium right to that leaf and stomata area. But we also reduce canopy humidity. If we can do that in the environment by pulse irrigating 2-3 hour sets, and we can use throttle max or liquid max to get the water into the soil, the mulch of the cover crop to keep it from getting hit directly by sunlight. If we're not evaporating it off the surface, we're using it, but what's the other thing? We're not creating humidity in the canopy. Do diseases like humidity or low humidity? High or low? High. So we're creating the problem with our irrigation and how we're managing that. So quit doing it. Create an opportunity for it to be a favorable environment to avoid those. And, you know, here's a great look at cover crops, and this is what you guys are wanting to see, but there's a lot of magic going on there. A lot of carbon, a lot of insect benefits, a lot of opportunity to take that mulch and put it on the berm, save water. A lot of great things. And Keith and Silas are going to talk more about that. So let's say we do have to get out the hammer. If you're going to do it right. Okay? This is the key point here. Because if you put it on, you don't time it right, you don't have the right volume, you don't have the right sprayer set up, or you don't have the right water quality, that's a huge thing. You're still putting out the same amount of ingredient. If only 50% is available to the plant to do the job, you still put 100% of that ingredient out. You know, treat the spray water. We're going to have a lunch and learn future on sprayer setups. We're pretty excited about some technology coming from Precision Planting. And they're very sensitive to water quality. It can be neutralized quickly by poor water quality. We have to make sure all of our water is treated first before we ever add an active ingredient to it, so that we can spray less. Because the environment still sees that same load of fungicide or insecticide, but it's neutralized to the point where it won't maybe kill that pest that you're hoping to do, but it's still been applied within that farm or within that field. You know, take an example, navel orangeworm. You know, most think, oh, hit the easy button, I need to spray. But all of you guys here now are thinking, how do I prevent the problem? Well, knock off your mummies. We all know that. Well, wait a minute. Why don't we prevent the mummies? So how do we prevent the mummies? Irrigation management and efficiency, balanced nutrition, so that we get a fully mature nut that produces the abscisic acid needed to detach it from the tree. If it don't stick tight, you don't have a problem. So we have to really back up in the season instead of, oh crap, we have to spray something in, what is it, February? Is that when we're doing for navel orangeworm sprays? Whenever. We have to spray it. We need to back up and look at what we're doing in July and get that right. Okay, prevent the problem, don't poke the button. Number 3 thing we can do, less neonicotinoids. These are persistent, water-soluble toxic substances. We've all been told neonics are better because you use less total pounds of active ingredient. That's what the industry has told us. And if you think about it, you all seen the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima, Fat Boy, you know, it was mounted on the bottom of a 1B-29 that went over, okay? Think of the destruction that that one bomb caused. How many B-29s of regular bombs would have to fly in order to do that same amount of destruction? Well, that's the equivalent argument for neonics. Neonic is an atom bomb. Our synthetic pyrethroids in our older chemistries are conventional bombs. They're both toxic, but one's sure a lot more powerful than the other. And neonic is extraordinarily powerful. And you really need to listen to these 2 research scientists and what they got to say about it and why it's a real problem. It's water soluble, so the residues move into the soil, into the water courses, and even into groundwater. It has a 5-year half-life at a soil pH of 7.3. Anybody got a 7.3 pH or higher? It's much more persistent. And it can be taken up by a plant several years later. Lundgren found where 5 years after neonic seed treatments, just the seed treatment, not a spray, a seed treatment on corn, 5 years later found neonics in the sunflower nectar 5 years later from a seed treatment, causing bees to not die. That's why we can't figure out this colony collapse disorder. They don't die, they get disoriented. They can't find their way back home. That's why they just disappear. So it's a huge, huge problem. And even if you stop today, I stopped 5 years ago, and now I'm starting to see the benefits and the wildlife come back and everything. But, you know, remember, when you poke this insecticide button, you bomb the bad guys and the good guys. It is non-selective. It is not laser guided. You know, it's not cool. In the videos, you kill everything. So what do you do instead? First, use excellent IPM practices. IPM stands for integrated, not insurance pest management. Okay, the industry, we've forgotten that. Oh, integrated means getting your boots in the field. If your PCA writes recs from the office by looking at a calendar, changing the name and field on the recs, do yourself a favor, fire them, get a new one by next year. You're better off without one. You can look at a calendar, for crying out loud. Why is a person getting paid $150,000 look at a calendar? Look at a field. That's a terrible scourge on our industry. Create an environment where beneficial confers, the high diversity cover crops, insect strips, and equip the crop to defend itself. You can do that. Brix levels. We know at different Brix levels, this is still being researched, okay? One primary source for this right now, there needs to be more sources. Dr. Callahan out of Florida and then his protege, Dr. Deitch, talk about it. Arden Anderson also talks a little bit about harmonic frequencies of plants. As nutrient status changes, they become invisible to insects. Put the tinfoil hat on, okay? But there is some things to this. And we've seen it when back east, if I have a cornfield and right adjacent to it, like 30 inches away is the neighbor's cornfield, we'll spray a foliar, I'll overlap on the neighbor's corn, and you go over where we quit overlapping, and you'll see insects coming on. So it's there's something happening there in the signaling and also in the Brix content. Fourth thing we can do, less GMOs. Hey, almonds, not a problem, but beware, there's edited genetic editing coming quickly. And I don't like it. It's the Wild West. We don't know what we're doing. We really don't. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong, right? Do you know the CRISPR gene has 14 matches with the honeybee genome? So in other words, the gene that we're using to modify corn plants can modify a honeybee in 14 places. How cool is that? We could have Roundup Ready honeybees. We have several problems, chronic inflammation, those kind of things. Number 5 we can do less of is tillage, because we disrupt fungal association with the tree roots. They're doing a heavy living, giving us the free nutrients there, oxidized soil, carbon, all those things. Tillage can be deadly, literally. Okay, this happened last year. Last year. We had 6 people died because tillage and windstorm. And the wind's no different than what it is here. And that's just sad. The state police said, well, farmers got to till. Farm Bureau said, well, farmers got to till. No, they don't. They don't. That's crazy. Here's me planting. Wife brought me lunch. She took a picture of me up there and planter. We got our cover crop long-term trial test plot. You can see the dust coming off of me. And then she turned to the left. There's the neighbor planting at the same time. He had less rain, of course. That's why. I probably had 2 inches more rain. That's why mine doesn't have dust, right? So infiltration rate is something that your team can look into for you here. Long-term no-till, we've been able to get down to 2 minutes and 28 seconds to incorporate an inch of water versus long-term deep tillage across the way, 15 minutes. So there can be a dramatic difference when you incorporate cover crops, no-till, and good water management and water penetrance to really improve water infiltration. Then, so now what? Great, you told me all this bad stuff. What do I do? Keep water on your trees ASAP after harvest. Apply Liquid Max to get it into the tree, get the calcium it needs for next year's calcium need for leaf tissue development, and keep it readily available. You have to have your profile full prior to winter rains if you want any leaching to occur. If you're happy with the salts you got and you really want to keep them, don't water. If you'd rather leach salts, make sure your profile's full prior to winter rain. Winter rain's the one chance we got to leach salts. Plant high diversity cover crops, water run our products there for low stress after harvest. Really, really key. We do too much too late in almonds. Do less earlier. There you go. I could have saved you an hour. After that, come to our sprayer clinic next year. We got some really neat plans on how we're going to help you improve efficiency. What if we could cut your sprays in half for now and get to a quarter in the future, and get to none after that? I think it's great. We have to be ready to execute, execute, execute. That's what my son-in-law was on a SWAT team. They didn't say, knock on the door, see if anybody's home, maybe we can hand them a warrant. It was police, 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 bam, when they went. So that's what you have to be ready. You have to have a plan. You have to have everything. Everybody has to be on that team, just like a SWAT team, ready to execute. And I'd just like to say we practice what we preach. This is me and my wife, Robin. And there's my brother from another mother. We kind of got the same build, don't we, Keith? That's Gabe Brown. Kind of a friend of mine. Everything we recommend on our own farms. We've had 25 years of low nitrogen, 10 years of no fungicides and insecticides, 5 years of no neonics, 7 years non-GMO, and 30 years of no tillage. Consistently anywhere we can make these things happen. You may not be able to go no, but we certainly can go less. So be a less on instead of a moron. And right now is a great time to start. And just remember, change isn't easy, right? Everybody says, we want change. We want to do better. Who wants to change? Who wants to lead it? Hope that's me and everyone in this room. Going to make that change. So if you haven't had a chance, listen to the podcast, please do. We get to have some wonderful people on there that are real thought leaders, from medical doctors to researchers to farmers. It's a great opportunity to help everyone think differently. And it's a great thing. Grateful Graze, this is where we're raising meat as the 5th soil health principle and selling it direct to consumer. And then our farm. don't go to the farm website. We haven't updated it for years. So, don't really need to. But I thank you for your time, and I really hope that you'll consider everything that you can do to do less. And really think about, why is this happening? What am I doing that's causing that to happen? If I change this, then I don't have to play whack-a-mole the rest of the season.
Keith has done a great job of working with us, getting to know some of the resource concerns, some of the challenges that we have out in the field. So Keith brings a lot of practical experience, plus a lot of high-level knowledge. And so tying all these things together, it's been really fun. And so Keith, I thank you for all your help, and I let you have fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Silas. Good to be here. I love free stuff. And I know you like free stuff too. Everybody loves free stuff, but especially farmers. I mean, you look around at farmers' hats or their coats or their jackets, most that's free. And back where I'm from, the seed corn companies, you buy enough seed, you get a free trip to Tahiti or to Hawaii or wherever they're giving free trips to. We all love free stuff. And there's so much free stuff that we have available to us that we're not taking advantage of. And so this dovetails pretty nicely onto what Monte talked about. And I'm going to talk about the 7 freebies for farmers. And as I go through these, ask yourself, are you getting your share? Because the cool thing about these things that I'm going to talk about is that what you get doesn't take away from the share that I get. So it's not a zero-sum game where we've just got a certain amount and we have to divide it up. We've all got access to virtually unlimited amounts of many of these things. Not all, but many. So first thing, solar energy, sunlight. As farmers, what we're really doing, and all farmers are the same, we're really capturing sunlight and turning it into something of value that we can sell. So corn grower, soybean grower, wheat grower, almond grower, pistachio, livestock, we're really just turning that sunlight into something of value. Photosynthesis, you all know this, you learned it probably in elementary school. It's the most important chemical formula in the world. CO2 plus H2O, so carbon dioxide and water, with the energy of the sun. The sun is what makes this happen. It drives this whole process. The chlorophyll in the plant, it turns it into C6H12O6, which is glucose. It's a simple carbohydrate type sugar, and oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct. But this is the basis of what we do as farmers. We're taking that sunlight and turning it into something of value. And the only way we can really do that is through a plant. We can capture it, we can store it, and we can convert it into something of value in a plant. So when we have a situation like this, when you have an almond orchard, or, I can give this talk anywhere. I can show you cornfields and soybean fields and wheat fields where there's just bare, fallow ground with nothing growing. There is no solar energy being captured in between the rows of those trees. But when we have something like this, these rock stars here standing out, outstanding in their field here, we're capturing an incredible amount of solar energy, not just from the trees, but also in the middles. And we're turning that into something of value. Now you may say, well, but we're not getting value off that cover crop because we're not, now some of you may be grazing it or, pulling some hay bales off it, but most of us aren't. So how can you say that's something of value when it's just being allowed to go back into the soil? Well, as Monte showed you, and as I'll show you too, there's still a lot of value to the system, even though you're not physically harvesting it and selling it and getting a check for it. The check is being written by the biology, by your system. And so when you're doing this, you need to look at that as a missed opportunity, because when that sunlight hits bare ground, it's not just a neutral effect. It's not just the fact that you're wasting the solar energy, but you're doing a lot of harm. Andrew was talking earlier, Monte mentioned it, 50 degrees difference between the bare soil and some covered soil. And that's a huge thing when it comes not only to how much moisture you retain or lose, it's a huge thing on how much biology lives and dies as well. So when we waste the solar energy, you know, it's a free gift from God that he's given us that we're just letting go to waste. And so we need to make sure that we're capturing that solar energy because it drives our whole system. And the more efficient that we can be in capturing solar energy, the more efficient and profitable our farming operations are going to be. And then there's another thing here too, and there's a lot of research coming out. John Kemp especially has a lot of good research in his Advancing Eco Ag organization, but they're showing that when plants are healthy and nutritionally balanced, a lot of what Monte was talking about, when you get those minerals balanced in those plants, and whether it's a cover crop, but especially your cash crop, your trees or your tomatoes or your corn or soybeans or whatever you're growing, when those plants are healthy and they're nutritionally balanced, they will photosynthesize at a higher rate. And that's something as farmers we don't often look at or think about is, are we maximizing how efficient our plants are being at photosynthesis? Because it's just something we kind of take for granted. It's a little difficult to measure sometimes, but when they're healthy and balanced, they photosynthesize at a higher rate, which means they're going to grow bigger, they're going to grow faster, and they're going to be more productive. And so those are some things to keep in mind as we look at sunlight as a free resource that we can harvest and turn into something of value. Number 2, carbon. Got some questions about carbon. Carbon, in my opinion, needs a new press agent because it's the whipping boy right now. You listen on the news, you think carbon is going to be the end of civilization, according to some people. Carbon is not a problem. It's not a problem. It's free food for both our plants and for our biology. And so it's a fundamental lack of understanding of how carbon works and how carbon cycles. And, you know, do we have global warming or climate change? You know, I don't get into those arguments. I just tell people I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. But I know the solution is getting the carbon back where it belongs, and that's into the soil. So again, photosynthesis, the CO2, the 6CO2, that's the basis of photosynthesis. That's one of the main ingredients in making this whole system work. And plants are taking that CO2 out of the atmosphere and they're putting it into the plants, which is going to end up into the soil. It's going to end up in the plant tissue. It's going to end up in the biology. It's going to end up in our food supply. That's the basis of what we're eating, whether it's the donuts now or the tacos later. That's largely coming through this photosynthetic process. And so carbon is not really the problem. It's the fact that it's not in the soil. Now, somebody asked a question about, you know, are we having more effects of having CO2 in the atmosphere? Well, you know, greenhouses pump CO2 into the atmosphere of a greenhouse so they can increase plant growth. It makes them more efficient. Because, and here's kind of a fun thing to do. If you get arguing with somebody who's saying that we have too much carbon in the atmosphere and carbon's going to kill us and we need to, you know, we need to get these giant vacuum cleaners to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere and we'll pump it into a mine shaft somewhere. Ask them how much carbon is in the atmosphere. Chances are they will not know. They'll tell you too much, but push on them. How much? How much is that? It's about 4/100ths of 1%. 4/100ths of 1%. Now that's not very much, but our plants, our trees are very efficient at pulling that out and putting it into things. So carbon is not a problem. It's free food for plants and biology. And here's how this works. It's a wonderful system, the way that God created this to work. So plants, through photosynthesis, are taking that carbon out of the atmosphere and they're putting it into a liquid form that can move up and down through that plant tissue. And as much as 50% of the carbon that a plant produces through photosynthesis, it's not used to grow the plant. As much as 50% of that is leaked out through the root system into the soil, into what we call the rhizosphere. And the biology, all of these biological organisms are eating that, they're consuming that, and in exchange, they're delivering services back to the plant. Because plants are actually pretty smart. Plants may be smarter than some people that I know, because if they don't see a return on that investment, if they're putting that carbon out into the soil and they're not seeing a return on that investment, they'll stop doing it. So if you're farming in a biological desert, in a land and soil that has very little biology, your plants will figure that out and they will not be putting the carbon into the soil. They could be, but what would the point be? There's nothing there to give them a benefit. And so when these biological organisms are present, they'll take that carbon and they'll provide services back to the plant, whether it be a tree or a corn plant or anything else. So I got a series of pictures here from a friend of mine, Jimmy Emmons. Jimmy is a regenerative farmer in Oklahoma, and he got some really great pictures here. So this is a picture of cover crop. This is cereal rye, massive root system in cereal rye. You can tell this came from a really healthy environment. You can see all of the soil that is sticking to the plant roots here, all of these dreadlocks. That's a sign of good biologically active soil. So he's a good farmer. He's got good biological activity. So he had a field day. He had planted cereal rye as a cover crop the previous fall, had a field day in the spring, and he started taking some pictures. They started digging up and they started taking pictures, and he got this and so he's taking these pictures with his iPhone, and he has a little magnifying thing on it called a proscope. So he's able to magnify. So these pictures, the one on the right and then the next one I'm going to show you, were magnified. But what makes these pictures unique is that as he dug up some soil and it broke apart right at a worm burrow, a worm channel. And so what you see here, this is a cereal rye root that's growing sideways through a worm channel. So the diameter of the worm channel is right here. So that's about an 1/8 of an inch at the most. So we're looking at a cereal rye root. What we're looking at is it growing through the airspace of this worm channel. And look at all of these root hairs coming off of this. Now, typically you don't see all of this because it's embedded in the soil. And when you pull that plant up out of the soil, those things are very fragile and they're just going to break off. And as he got to looking at this, he noticed some things. And so he magnified his little proscope one more notch. So this is the previous picture. This is a magnification of the same picture. And look at all of these liquid droplets coming out of those root hairs. That's the liquid carbon that's being produced through photosynthesis that's being leaked into the root system. And there's a lot of it. There's hundreds of liquid droplets in 1/8 of an inch of soil. And cereal rye has a massive root system. So this plant is pumping hundreds of millions, if not trillions, of droplets of carbon per acre into this soil on an ongoing basis to feed the biology that's out there. And that's building his soil. And it's the same way when you guys use cover crops. That cover crop, yeah, you may not harvest and sell that and get a cash check, but what's the value of putting that carbon into the soil through that cover crop? So when you have a big old massive cover crop like this is one of the pictures I took when I was out here in California. One of the mixes that is being used, sometimes it's being silage, sometimes it's being grazed, sometimes it's being hayed, sometimes it's just allowed to go back into the soil. But that's a massive carbon pump right there. And that's pumping huge amounts of carbon back into the soil. And I don't know if any of you are in any carbon programs or interested in any carbon programs. We personally are not yet. I think there's just too much unknown out there as to what is a carbon credit worth and who's willing to pay for it and what strings are attached. We haven't done any of that on our own 1,800 acres that we farm there in Nebraska yet, but we might at some point if we find a program that we're comfortable with. But even without getting paid to do it, there's a huge amount of value in this for our operation. So carbon is not a problem. The carbon is free for the taking. In fact, we may get paid to take it someday. And so the more that you can put into your soil, the better. So sunlight, nitrogen, or carbon, and then third is nitrogen. Now, Monte talked about this. He talked about putting too much nitrogen on. I'm here to tell you that nitrogen is free and abundant. You got more nitrogen than you could ever use, and it's free for the taking. But as U.S. agriculture as a whole, we spend $5 billion on nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, and that's everything from the tree growers here to the corn and soybean guys in my area and Monte's area and everything else. $5 billion is what we spend on nitrogen fertilizer. But that expense is really not for the nitrogen. You're not spending money on nitrogen. You're spending it on energy. Because here's the deal. This is a pie chart of our atmosphere. Here's CO2 right here, this tiny little sliver, you can barely see it, 0.04%. I was telling you that earlier. Most people don't realize that it is a tiny, tiny fraction of our atmosphere is CO2. And yet our plants can get the majority of the carbon that they need to grow, massive crops from that 0.04% of the atmosphere. Nitrogen is 78% of our atmosphere. Above every cropland acre in California and in Nebraska and in Illinois, you have 30,000 tons of nitrogen. 30,000 tons. Now that's enough to grow pretty much any crop if you could get access to it. But here's the thing. It is held as dinitrogen. So there's two nitrogen molecules and they're bonded to each other and they don't want to interact with anything else. It makes it inert. And that's both good and bad. The good thing is it's not toxic to us. Who's ever had a whiff of anhydrous or of ammonia, that stuff will clean you out and it can kill you. Corn soybean guys, I don't know, Monte, is there a lot of people in your area still using anhydrous ammonia? Yeah. Is there anything else? We stopped using it probably 30 years ago, but there's still a lot of it. And every year there's accidents. People are damaged or sometimes die from anhydrous inhalation because it will literally melt your insides if you get that in. But we can breathe in. Every time you take a breath, you're taking 78% nitrogen in. It does nothing to you because it's inert, because it's bonded to each other. The bad news is plants can do nothing with it either. As they're taking in the CO2 through their leaf stomata, they're bringing in that atmosphere. They're not filtering everything else out. They're taking in 78% nitrogen into their leaf. They can do absolutely nothing with it. They have to just expel that back out. And it's a constant cycle of bringing that carbon in with massive amounts of nitrogen. The plant can do nothing with it. It has to spit it right back out. So we, in our wisdom, have figured out how to build these, billion-dollar factories, and we can split that nitrogen apart and we can combine it with hydrogen and oxygen. We can make fertilizer. These started out making bombs for World War I and then World War II. And then after World War II, we had all these factories, all this capacity. So guess what? Farmers, you need fertilizer because we can make it. And we can make it pretty cheap. And that was the start of, kind of the green revolution, as they called it, because we had access to all this fertilizer because they were no longer using it to make bombs. And so when you're paying for nitrogen, the expense should not go under the fertility column because you've got all the nitrogen you need right above your acres. It's the energy that it takes to make it available in a plant form is what you're paying for. But what takes man billions of dollars to do, God gave us these tiny little organisms to do the same thing. So when you grow a legume plant, peas or vetch or beans or alfalfa, any of the legumes, they will allow a certain type of bacteria called rhizobia to colonize their roots, because a legume plant cannot make their own nitrogen, but they will form relationships with the bacteria that can do this. And these rhizobia are doing the same thing that these billion-dollar factories do. They're just doing it at a much smaller and much more efficient level because they're breaking that nitrogen bond and they're putting that nitrogen into a form that the plants can use. And so when this happens, now we can grow legume plants that can no longer need commercial nitrogen fertility. It's a great system. But that's only good for the legumes, right? Well, there are other things out there. There's these free-living organisms. They're called free-living diazotrophs. So azospirillum and zotobacter and bacillus and cyanobacteria, and they're discovering new ones all the time. These are organisms that do the same thing that rhizobia do. They're breaking that nitrogen bond, and they're making that nitrogen available to the plants. They just do it on a much smaller scale. So this is soybeans. When Monte grows 80 bushel soybeans because he's an awesome farmer there in Illinois, that's taking 450 pounds of nitrogen to do that. 450. Now, There's not many farmers that would be growing soybeans if you had to put 450 units of nitrogen on to do it. But these rhizobia can create 450 to 500 pounds of nitrogen in about 90 days, maybe even 60 days. Very fast, very efficient. These guys, 40 to 50 pounds of nitrogen in the course of a year. So is that enough to grow a big corn crop or a big almond crop or pistachios or anything else? No, not by itself, but it can sure help. It can be part of that solution. And this is why, as you drive down the roads, the medians here in California or Nebraska or Illinois, wherever you're at, you don't see the grass in the road ditches and the medians looking nitrogen stressed, do you? Now, it may look drought stressed. It may, have other issues. Litter. I saw a little bit of litter on your roads here. But it's not nitrogen deficient. And it's not because the California Highway Department is out there fertilizing it at night when you're not looking. At least, I don't think so. Are you? I mean, California is kind of weird sometimes, but I don't think that's happening. It's because these things are part of that system, and they're providing sufficient nitrogen in that system to make it work. And that's how our native systems were designed, to have these organisms making nitrogen available. Now, these things don't activate and they're not working when you have excess nitrogen in the soil. And so we have to be very careful. We have to be very balanced. But if we want to take advantage of the free nitrogen first, then we need to figure out how to farm in such a way that we can encourage these sorts of organisms to be part of that system. And I'll talk a little bit more about the biology later, but these things can be added to your soil. And then once they're there, you can keep them alive and keep them part of the system. So again, when you have a cover crop that looks like this, very diverse, got some legumes in there. There's peas and vetch and clover in this particular one. We've got nitrogen being produced through the rhizobia, or I should say being made available, but also through the free living organisms as well. All right, number 4, oxygen. Oxygen is free. It's part of our atmosphere as well, and it's available. And we don't often think about oxygen as being something that our crops need. Again, it's one of these things that we take for granted until it's not there. And when it's not there, it's because we have compaction. Now, Monte talked about the compaction layer between our ears, which is very real. It's a real thing. That struggle is real for sure. But sometimes we get compaction in our soils and we can't get oxygen down to where it needs to be. So as your plants are growing, as your biology is working in the soil, one of the byproducts of anything growing is going to be carbon dioxide, and that gets in the pore spaces of your plant. And if it can't escape out and oxygen get back in, your roots will cease to grow. Roots will never grow deeper than where you have oxygen in the soil. So you got to get the CO2 out and you've got to get the oxygen in. It's just like a lung. It's just like a person living. You have to get the CO2 out and you have to get new oxygen in order to stay alive. It's the same way for the biology. It's the same way for your plants. And when you have compacted soils, you cannot get the oxygen in and your growth will be severely limited. So in a compacted soil like this over here, you're going to have very little plant root growth. And when you have a little bit of small root growth, you're going to have small above ground growth, and it's particularly potential. But when you have well aggregated, well drained, good porosity in your soils, you're going to have a much healthier plant growth up here. So a lot of times in our area, I know people will say, well, I don't get enough rainfall to grow that crop or to do this or to do that. Sometimes the limiting factor is not the amount of rainfall you get. Sometimes it's how much oxygen you can get into your soil, because you're so compacted that you can't get either oxygen or water down here. And so the rainfall that you get, you waste most of it, or the irrigation that you put on, you waste a lot of that. So again, when we have a cover crop like this, that, it may not be that impressive above the ground. It may not look like a lot, but look at the amount of root growth. And those roots are what is helping to aerate that soil. It's opening that soil up, and it's allowing both water and oxygen to get deep. And then the deeper those roots can grow, then everything works and everything is better. Number 5, Monte talked a lot about the different minerals, but your soils are rich in these minerals that your plants need to grow. So if you look at soil, it's 45 to 50% minerals that make it up by weight. And if you would ever do, when you send a soil test in, I don't know, Silas, if you do any total nutrient digestion, yeah, you do. Very interesting to look at, because oftentimes you have a tremendous amount of the minerals that your plants need to grow, but the plants can't get them. And so the difference between a regular soil test, which may show, 8 parts per million of phosphorus, which is low, and they're saying you need to put all this phosphorus on, and the total amount of phosphorus in your soil, which may be 6,000 pounds, is, can it be available to the plants or not? And oftentimes the answer is no, it can't be, because it's tied up in an inorganic form. But all of these, so nitrogen is not naturally occurring from the soil, it's stored in the soil, but these other things, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, boron, copper, zinc, molybdenum, they're part of your soil. It's part of what makes up your soil, the mineral portion, and we just need to make them available for the plants to get. So you have to literally mine them out of there. And I love this article that was in Scientific America a number of years ago, because it says mycorrhiza fungi run the largest mining operation in the world. And I like this because when you think about a mining operation, you think about this giant equipment, tires the size of a house and all of this stuff happening at this very large scale. They're saying the largest mining operation in the world, if you don't have a really good microscope, you don't even know it's happening, because it's happening at that microscopic level, but across such a vast area that it's the largest mining operation. So this is some pictures from this article. This is a piece of feldspar. Just think of this as a little tiny grain of sand or a mineral component of your soil, highly magnified, and you see these brown areas. These are actually mine shafts, miniature mine shafts, hollowed out areas that have been tunneled out. They've been liquefied and drawn out by mycorrhiza fungi, and they have the ability to do that, but they can't survive on these minerals. They have to be fed the carbon from the plant. So again, it's this relationship between the plant and the biology, and it has to work that way. So this is what the mycorrhiza look like. This is what they do. This is what they look like. And mycorrhiza can colonize almost all plants. There's a few plants that don't host them very well, but trees are great hosts of mycorrhiza. Now, there are different types of mycorrhiza than what your cover crops would be, but cover crops can also host these. The arbuscles, these are called arbuscular mycorrhiza fungi. So it's actually, you see these little black things, these actually grow inside the plant roots. Now, this is highly magnified enough. These are not root hairs coming out. This is the hyphal fungi. This is part of this mycorrhiza here, the fungal hyphae. And so it's coming out, and that's what's going out and exploring the soil, and that's what's actually drilling these little mine shafts. They create the right chemical enzymes. They can actually cultivate their own bacteria that help to liquefy this mineral, and it brings this back out, and it feeds it directly back to the plant. The plant that's hosting it, the plant that's feeding it, gets the benefit of these minerals coming right back to it. And so this, yesterday I was down at Bolt House Farms, large carrot grower down at Bakersfield. They've been doing cover crops for a number of years down there, seeing some really good things. And so they had, this is some data that they had pulled a couple years ago. I think this is from 2022. And basically they're just looking at what is the value of the mineral component or the fertility component of these cover crops. And so what they did is they just took a simple clipping. This is really easy to do. You clip like 1 square yard or square meter or whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter as long as the lab knows how much of an area that you clip. So they clipped 9 square feet here, square yard. They sent it into the lab, and the lab converted it. And so this one, they said on a per acre basis, there was 4,187 pounds of dry matter. Based on the sample that you sent us, then we did the math. So there was about 4,200, a little over 2 tons of dry matter per acre. That's not a lot. That's cover crop that's maybe 18 to 24 inches tall. Okay, so a moderate amount. So they did one on the high end, one on the low end. And so then the lab analyzed it, and it was 3.59% nitrogen. So even on that, there was 150 pounds of nitrogen in that sample. So on a per acre basis, 150 pounds of nitrogen, 28 pounds of sulfur, 18 pounds of P, 215 pounds of potassium, and right on down the list. You can look at all of these different mineral nutrients. And so then back in 2022, they assigned a value, what would it cost if we had to go out and buy that? And down here, this is 4187, this is RC6N. So they said that is worth $434.90 an acre. Is if they had to go buy all of this fertility right here, that's what it would have cost them. Now it's probably a little high because this is on organic land. Okay, these were some of their organic carrots. So these numbers may be higher than if you were conventional, because all of the organic minerals are going to be more expensive than non-organic. And then they also had one, they put a little more water on this, they let it grow longer. And this stuff, I mean, was shoulder high. I may have some pictures of Malcolm standing out in that. This is almost 17,000 pounds of dry matter biomass per acre. That's shoulder high and thick. And I've been in some of the California Ag Solutions cover crop fields, both this past April and a year ago, that were like this. I mean, you could hardly walk through them because they were 5 to 6 feet tall and just thick as could be. And I would guess they were that 15 to 18,000 pounds of dry matter biomass. Now look at these numbers: 418 pounds of nitrogen, 600 pounds of potassium. You talk about cycling some nutrients here. That's massive. Now, is that all being pulled out of the soil system? No, some of that was already out there and available for the plants, but these cover crops are great scavengers. They're picking that up, and especially the nitrogen. Nitrogen and sulfur are very mobile in water, and if they didn't get picked up by these plants and you get a wet winter, well, there's 4 things that can happen. Monte showed 4 things that can happen to that. It can, well, it's already in the soil, so 3 things. It's going to get leached out the bottom. It's going to run off, end up in either the groundwater or the stream water, and those are all bad things. But if we can tie it up in the plant biomass of a cover crop, now when that cover crop dies and it decomposes and it starts to release that slowly, the goal would be to be releasing that as your next cash crop. But in your case, if it's a permanent crop, you just have to wait for that tree to be actively growing again, then let those nutrients release and let the trees pick it up. But that's assuming that you're not putting more fertility on, because the trees are always going to get what's easiest. Easiest is what's stored in the roots. Second easiest is going to be what you're applying right through the water system, which is going to be right at the roots. And then the last thing they're going to do is to pull in this decomposing plant matter, because that's more, it's more difficult for the trees to do, but it's there free for the taking. And so, when you start looking at numbers like this, and I'm sure Silas and the California Ag team has done some analysis like this, it's a massive amount of minerals that you can either cycle or you can make available, because some of this was not available to other plants. But the power of the biology, the power of the cover crop is pulling this out of that mineral portion and making it available for the next plant. So the big one was almost $1,200 value of these organic minerals. And again, you're not going to see that every year. But even if it's a fraction of the low end of these, it more than pays for the cover crop, for the planting, for the termination, for all of the management. You can easily pay for the cover crops just simply by the minerals that you're cycling and that you're scavenging. So here's a picture of Malcolm. He's one of the farm managers down there at Bolt House. This is kind of on the low end, about knee high, and this is some of the taller stuff, shoulder high type cover crops there. And again, I've seen those exact same types of cover crops and growth up here as well. Yeah, here's one that we were in just back in April, and that's just a massive amount of tonnage out there. Some of that would have got silaged off, and that's okay, because you can make quite a bit of money, but know what you're giving up. Know what you're hauling to that feedlot. So you should always take a clipping of that. Now, maybe you've got excess nutrients already out there. That's the case in some of these fields. That's okay to be hauling that off. But know the cost of the forage that you're getting rid of when you send it to the feedlot, because there is a cost associated with that. So again, just coming back to the same chart, understand what that cost is. But the minerals are there. They're either in your soil and you can pull them out and cycle them out, or they're carryover nutrients or excess nutrients. You know, Monte talked a lot about, you know, a lot of times we have more issues with the excesses. There's nothing better to help bring your excesses back into balance and growing a cover crop, a diverse cover crop, because some cover crop species are going to be much better at others than pulling in the potassium or the phosphorus or the magnesium or the calcium. And so by having a diverse cover crop mix, you're going to have a way to bring that back into balance and, you know, make those excesses kind of go away. Number 6, water, precipitation. It's given to all. Now, this is not one that I'm telling you there's unlimited amounts, because that's not true in almost any area. Water is a very precious commodity, and we must manage it as so. So how can I say that it's free? Because you know what your irrigation costs you. You know, we irrigate in Nebraska, and there's a cost to that as well. I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about what does fall from the you know, sky, the precipitation. That is free and it's given to all. It's all about how we manage it. Now, your irrigation water, yes, you have to spend money to get it, and you're going to be limited. So the point that I want to make here is that we need to be the best stewards of what we have access to as what we can. Water is a critical part of photosynthesis. If you don't have water, that plant will not grow because it cannot photosynthesize. That's just plain and simple. That's a fact. If you don't have water, plants aren't going to grow. So it's important that we manage the water that we have. And when we look at the water cycle, you know, all of these different parts of the water cycle, we really don't have a lot of control over a lot of this. Although it was interesting, the guys at Bolthouse were talking about, you know, they farm a major part of the Cuamo Valley, I think, is where they're at, and they're talking about if they could get Grimway, who farms the other major portion of that, if they could all do cover crops. There's about 20,000 acres, I think, in that valley. If they could all do cover crops at the same time, could they change the microclimate of that valley? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, they could. And that would be such a cool experiment to do, because now they could affect most of the parts of this water cycle. But since you don't have control over your whole little area, about the only thing that we can control here, and this is an important one, we can control the infiltration that we get. And when we don't control that infiltration, we don't take advantage of a lot of the water that we're either getting for free from precipitation or that we're spending money on and we're putting on through irrigation. We have to control that infiltration, because when we don't, you know, you get things like this in a really wet season. You know, Tulare Lake wants to come back. If everybody would have had appropriate amounts of infiltration, would this have happened? Well, there would have probably been some out there with the big rainfall events that you got, but I don't think this guy's tractor would have got stranded, you know, out in the middle of the lake. And so these are some pictures that Silas sent just showing the infiltration differences. So these pictures were about 200 feet apart, is what I was told. No cover crops over here, cover crops over here. So where there was no cover crops, it was very poor infiltration. And as they started watering these trees, instead of the water going down, the water just wanted to move sideways, because the percolation, the infiltration was so slow and so poor that when they turned on the drip, instead of going down, it just went sideways. And you can see this, you can see the salt ring here from this water not going down like it should. Over here, where they changed the management and started using cover crops, or cover crops on the berm. There were cover crops out in the middles, but because it was a dry year, you know, those had kind of died off, and that was okay. But now this is being actively watered just like this, but now you don't see that water because these roots are helping take it down. You can kind of see the old salt rings from before. Those will eventually go away with the better infiltration and better percolation. Now, I was talking to Andrew earlier, and I don't know, do you feel comfortable sharing some of what you were talking about, some of what you've seen with how fast your stuff soaked down compared to some of your, because it illustrates this point exactly.
for 24 hours with double line drip, and they're only going to get an infiltration of, I'm going to say 6 inches is being generous. Whereas on my cover crop fields where I have full coverage, I drop water about 30 inches in 18, 19 hours. So it's a huge difference, right?
Yeah. And so 30 inches of water penetration versus 6 to 8, you know, number one, you're wasting a lot of water because when it's sitting on the top like this, you know, that's not just going to stay there. That's going to evaporate, and that's what's leaving all the salt behind. So it's very inefficient. You're spending money to basically add to the humidity and not to water your crop. And so, you know, cover crops can help do that. Different management, you know, no-till, all these soil health practices that Monte talked about, and I'm showing pictures here. It's a big part of it. It's a big part of utilizing the water that you get from precipitation, but also the water that you're paying for. You know, if you're going to pay for it, make sure it's getting to where it needs to be. And so, you know, when you have a system like this, you're going to have far, far better infiltration and water use efficiency. This is even better because now it's all covered. You know, and some people would look at that, and it's exactly like what Monte was saying. We have to change the paradigm of what we think a beautiful field looks like. And it's the same way in my area. You know, some of the old school farmers, they still think a perfectly looking seed bed is completely tilled, nothing growing, and it's just, you know, it looks like, you know, what you would see as a tilled up garden, ready to plant. That's the way it should look. And unfortunately, some landlords, some landowners still demand that. But we drive past something like this or those cover crop fields that we have, and we go, that's a beautiful field. That's life. That's it is living, and things are happening out there. And that's the way that, you know, God created plants and biology to live and grow together. And so I've got my kids either trained or brainwashed, I'm not sure which, because when they drive past the field where someone's doing tillage or it's just all bare and the dust is blowing, again, much like Monte showed, they're like, why is that guy doing that? You know, why is he out there tilling? You know, why isn't there something growing out there? And it's like, well, kids, let me tell you, yeah, it's hard. You know, the struggle is real. So part of it is we have to change that mindset, get through those tillage, compaction layers between our ears of what a beautiful field looks like. And going back to Bolt House again, I met with all their farm managers there yesterday down in Bakersfield, and they were telling me that when they start irrigating these carrots that have been grown, and they have to till those cover crops in pretty deep, you know, because that carrot seed is tiny, tiny, tiny. So they have to have a pretty good seed bed to get those carrots to come up in. But even at that, they say the infiltration is, you know, vastly different where they had a cover crop before versus where it was just fallow. So even though they're doing tillage to get rid of the cover crop so they can plant the next crop, they see huge improvements in water use efficiency and infiltration where they had the cover crop versus where they didn't. And I know Silas said that, you know, they've got a lot of, you know, studies, you know, Andrew's seeing it, you know, where you have those roots growing, you're going to be much more efficient with your water. And then number 7, the 7th freebie here is soil biology makes the system bigger, faster, stronger, and more efficient. Every single one of these things I've been talking about, biology has been some sort of a component with it. You know, when we first started, and I like, Monte, I liked your time frame of, you know, how you implemented the soil health principles. You know, back when we were doing no-till, and we started, you know, doing no-till back in the late 80s, I'm sure, you know, you've been 30 years, so it's back in that same time frame. We never thought about biology. We couldn't see it, really didn't have good ways to measure it. We didn't even think about it, but we knew that no-till was making a difference. It was helping us, you know, with our water, and we're in a drier environment than what Monte is, you know, much better than you guys are, 25 inches versus, what are you getting, 40 probably out there? 32 is all? Okay. Well, here, I just think that it's like the promised land out there. But regardless, we never thought about the biology. And so we never stopped to question the practices that we were doing, how it was affecting it, neonics and other things. But now, you know, we may not have all the answers, but I think we're at least asking the right questions. And the question is, if I do this, how will it affect my soil biology? And so we want to get as much biology out there as possible. And there's, you know, lots of different parts of the biology. We're not going to go into all of those. but it's essentially there for free. Now, can you pay money to put extra biology on? Yes, you can. Do you have to? Well, you don't have to, but there's certain times when you should. You should inoculate every legume that you ever plant because it's cheap. And if that rhizobia is not there, then that legume plant is not going to work the way it was intended to do. You can put some of these other things, the Azotobacter and Azospirillum and cyanobacteria. You can add those pretty easily and cheaply as a seed treatment. But here's the stunning thing that I heard this summer. Christine Jones, who is widely regarded as one of the top minds in soil health and microbiology, and sadly she's retiring from traveling and speaking, but hopefully she'll still continue to teach. But she was telling us that a single seed grown in a healthy regenerative environment can have 8 billion microbes in and on the seed. One seed, 8 billion microbes, different pieces of the biology, so that when you plant these healthy seeds grown in healthy environments, they're bringing their own biology to the party. And there's a big difference, and we got to figure out how to measure it. We need to figure out how to market it. There's a difference in how that seed was grown on what types of biology and how much comes with it. So we're trying to grow as much of the seed that we sell to you guys and to all of our customers. We're trying to grow as much of that as possible in regenerative environments. Probably 60% of the seed that we sell is grown by customers of ours who are doing at least some regenerative practices. So the biology is coming with the seed. So I like this saying, you need the biology. You got to have it in order to make these things work, to get all these free things, to be able to do less of the things that Monte was saying. You cannot do that if you don't have good biological activity, biological associations. You need them. So sometimes you have to seed them. And by that, I mean, it either has to be on and in the seeds that you plant, or you can add it to them. Again, biological seed treatments are not that expensive, pretty easy to do. It doesn't take any extra application, but then you have to feed them. And it makes no sense to me when people will put biological products out on their soil, on bare soil with nothing growing, because that's a guaranteed way to just, kill that biology. Basically, you're not putting them out there to grow, you're putting them out there to be a food source for something else. And so when you put them out there, you have to continue to feed them. And the way that happens, remember those pictures from Jemmy Emmons, they're eating those carbon root exudates. They're not eating the roots, they're eating the exudates from the roots. And so if you don't have a living root out there, you're not going to keep your biological activity at optimum and high levels. So that's what we want to do. And so, when you have orchards like this, you're feeding the biology all the way across that field. We're feeding biology all the way across that. And then when you integrate something like this, which again was mentioned, and I know there's some people in here, I was talking to you earlier, that are integrating the livestock. Now you're not only feeding the organisms below the ground, you're feeding the organisms above the ground. And the combination of that, it just makes that whole cycle better and faster. And the manure from these animals will help stimulate the grass growth. It will also, the biology that's in the gut of the rumen of these animals, small ruminants like sheep and goats, or the larger ones like cattle, very similar to a lot of the biology that's in your soil. And so it makes the system better when you can integrate that. And so it kind of comes down to this. Again, this is a picture that I took last year when I was here. This is a bolt house. I took this because it was bolt house, cover crops on the right, Grimway doing nothing on the left. And so I thought, that's a great picture. But if you were a carrot, which side of the road would you want to grow in? If you're a beneficial bacteria or mycorrhiza fungi or any type of living organism, which side of that do you want to be in? Well, it's pretty easy. You want to be over there where there's life and there's growth and not death and stagnant. And it's kind of the same way here. If you're an almond tree or pistachio or a grapevine or again, any living organism, which side of that equation do you want to be in? You want to be in the side where the biology is thriving and that there's a lot of life out there. And so that's kind of what I'll leave you with is, which system do you want? Which way do you want to farm? Which paradigm do you want to have? And I'll just leave you with this, and then Silas will come up and we'll attack these questions here in a little bit too. I want to encourage you to just continue to do your due diligence and learning. I applaud you for being here to try to learn. There's lots of different activities, lots of different events that you can go to. I think I'm a little biased probably, but I think one of the best is we put on a couple of events called the Regenerative Nexus Summits. We do one in Scottsdale, Arizona. We do one in Omaha, Nebraska. And I will make sure Silas gets you all invitations to that. It's kind of an invitation only type event. It's not really open to the general public because what it is, it's high level farmers who are coming and are willing to not only share, but really desire to learn. And so these are like user group type meetings. So we have a lot of panel discussions. Most of it's like this. We don't bring in outside keynotes. When I start deciding who's going to speak at this, I look to see who's signed up to come. So it's kind of the opposite of most events where you have a big name speaker and then you try to get people to come to listen to them. This one, I get people to sign up and then I say, hey, would you be on a panel? Hey, would you be on a panel? Hey, would you be on a panel? And just share your own experiences of what you're doing in these different areas. And then we open it up to a discussion to the whole room. We limit it to about 120 to 130 people because you start getting more than that and it's difficult to have a really good discussion. It's hard to get to know people. So if that's something you're interested in, the one in Scottsdale, Arizona, beautiful area. It's really easy to convince someone from Nebraska or Kansas to leave the crappy weather in January and come down there. You guys don't typically have as bad a weather, but it's still a beautiful place to come. It's going to be January 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. We got a great rate on these beautiful resort hotel rooms, so you can come down early, celebrate New Year's down there, and have a great learning experience. Silas has been there. Monte's been there. Anybody else in the room? Yeah, Martine's been there. So hopefully some of you can come because it's just a great opportunity to share your knowledge and to pick up lots of knowledge from other people. So with that, Silas, thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to coming back up. I think some of these have already kind of been addressed between Monte's talk and my talk, but we'll definitely get to the rest of them as we wrap up here.
Cool. Thank you so much, Keith. So I think part of what I'm going to try to accomplish here is just kind of doing, now that you got all this great information, what are we going to do next? What is the action plan? What are some things that we can actually take away from this and make changes on our own operations? So a lot of it's going to be nuts and bolts, and feel free to ask questions, interrupt me. You can raise your hand. I'm not offended with any of that. So I think a lot of really good information, Keith, that you've given, and Monte, thank you guys, because you realize how many things are happening to the like you just can't see this. It's just at a microscopic level. And so as Keith was mentioning the Pro Scope that Jimmy had, it's like I'm on Amazon trying to find something that I too could get and play with and take amazing pictures, because I love taking pictures of in the field because it's a great representation of showing people what is going on. Because if you can't explain it with words, you've got a picture on your phone that can just move this idea to the next person who can play with it, experiment with it. So that's really exciting to me, and I look forward to taking pictures with you guys in the future. So with this, you guys have gotten a lot of information, so I figured let's just answer 3 basic questions that I know all growers have. And so I'd say, when do we do this? What does this cost? And how does this pay for itself, right? I think every single one of you is wondering a lot of these things. Some of it you've already been doing. You're already getting these things applied on your own operation. That's great. So let's sit together, have you guys sit with guys who maybe have not done this yet, interact at lunch. That's the whole purpose of a lunch and learn, is not just listening to the 3 of us talk about, our experiences, taking pictures of different operations, but yet how do you guys share information? So that's one of the key things I'd love for you guys to do while we're doing all of this. So when do I do this? So when do we do post-harvest nutrition? When do we do cover crop planting? How do we manage all this? There's so many things that you guys are seeing right away. Now, keep in mind, this is just a general rule outline. A lot of you guys who have been doing this for the last few years have your own systems and you've built off your own systems, and it's very much context dependent, right? Certain operations will go a little bit earlier, a little bit later, totally fine. But this is just for basic understanding of what's really going on. So one of the most important things, and I know it's been mentioned a little bit, is water. One of the most important things that we can do for almonds, not pistachios, but almonds specifically, and a lot of the stone fruits, is the post-harvest irrigation. There was a study done probably about 30 years ago on post-harvest irrigation in almonds specifically, and it showed, so pretty much they stopped irrigation about a week before harvest. They didn't do anything, no irrigation afterwards, and then they measured the yield the following year, and they showed anywhere from a 34 to 54% reduction in yield compared to the same field that they had done normal irrigation throughout that whole time. So the reason why I bring this up is we're entering into the SGMA era where we're trying to figure out if we only have a certain amount of water, where are we going to put it? My caution to you is do not mess with post-harvest irrigation. As much as you can, do not do that, because that is one of the most important nutrition and carbohydrate storage that's happening for an almond specifically at this time, is being able to get nutrition in. So make sure that you nail the irrigation post-harvest. And a lot of that is happening in between your harvest. So between the pollinators and the other varieties that we've got. The biggest thing that I want you guys to remember is if we've got nutrition that needs to be flowing into that, we've got to have water flowing into that as well. Now, Monte and Keith both mentioned nitrogen. One of the most important things is not overdoing nitrogen in the end, because there's a lot of waste. You're only really needing anywhere from 10 to 20% of your nitrogen need for almonds, and a lot of the stone fruits are in the same category post-harvest. So you don't want to overdo it, because you'll get all this excess nitrogen just sitting there, not actually being uptake, and it just goes away. Now, if you got a cover crop, there's some benefit there, because now you've got something that's going to be able to uptake a lot of the excess nitrogen, nitrate that's just sitting there. But that's not our goal, is to feed the cover crop in that regard, right? It's just more of a catch-all. Now, we'll talk about kind of some of the details there in the next questions, but pistachios are very different, and that's what makes this so interesting. Is pistachios don't like hardly any water post-harvest, and you actually have to be kind of careful, because if you get too much water, you can have some mortality during the wintertime. They're very sensitive to too much frost, and even though you can have they can deal with some really hard cold temperatures, they can actually have some frost damage pretty easily. Now, nutrition-wise, they're not really that hungry. More than anything, you're looking at calcium and getting that into the tissue and being able to displace sodium in the soil. So really, it's more of just mitigating some of the problems that we have in some of our pistachio-type soils. High sodium, high EC, all those joys of growing pistachios, where pretty much no other permanent crop can do that well. So hopefully that makes sense. And then also, if you ever wondered, those of you who have moisture probes, this is a really interesting side fact, is pistachios have a huge root flush that actually happens the end of January. So most of us don't pay any attention to that. So we really want to make sure that we've got moisture there available at the end of January. So deep moisture is an indicator for that tree to determine how well is it going to partition energy, how well is it going to push for that bloom, because that bloom is what we're setting up for right now. So that's just more on the post-harvest nutrition, what we're trying to target here, what needs to happen. Now, when we talk about timing, and this is the most critical thing that we want to talk about with biology, with our temperature, with all of the things that are happening, all of these different, those of you who are colorblind for the blue, I apologize. I'll have to use the pointer. I did put a different color on there for some of you who could see green. But one of the key things that I want you guys to all see in this, and this is almonds specifically, pistachios are a little bit different, certain stone fruits are a little bit different, but the majority, what I'm looking at is, as we look at the root growth, and I'm going to focus first on the root growth, so it's the medium blue, so it's this line right here, and then we have this second root flush that happens in the fall. That root flush is kind of what we're after right now. And if you think about it, most of our root flush that is happening in our trees, in almonds specifically, we're kind of in this spot right about there. So this root flush has been happening during harvest when we have not been irrigating extremely well because of harvest. We're not trying to get the trees too wet. We're not trying to get causing problems for nuts on the ground. So we really need to be careful of what we're trying to accomplish with drying down. Trees that I have driven by for the last 6 weeks, I won't say who it is, but these trees have gone almost 7 weeks without water. They've only had 12 hours of water for the entire 7 weeks. So roughly half an inch of water in 7 weeks. They look like they're in the dead of winter right now in spots. And so what do you think's happening to that root flush? They've missed that whole opportunity to fix what's going to happen in this next vegetative and fruit growth for next year. So what we're trying to accomplish with the cover crop, and this is the part where it gets really fun because we're trying to time everything just right so that we can get the maximum benefit of all this massive root flush that feeds the microbes, and the microbes continue to feed the cash crop. So in this case, this green line right here, that's really pretty much the growth that the cover crop root system is pushing in. We're right before the major root flush that's happening, and we'll peak and then we drop off. Most of the cover crop species we're working with are cool season, and we're managing them so that they will be terminated and stop taking a lot of the water in that May timeframe. Now we can push them much later, and that depends on the GSA that you're in, how much water you're allowed. That also depends on where you're at with water, the type of irrigation system. So those of you who are allowed, 24 inches of water, and you've got to pay for anything that's pumped over that in your Sigma, there's different management strategies than what you might have if you're in, Modesto Irrigation District, where you might just have as much as you want. So it's really much a management strategy that we're after. But the biggest thing that we're looking at is how do we time a cover crop and all of that growth to take advantage and essentially prime the soil right before the tree is needing that huge root flush. So we're sharing the nutrition. We're getting all of those organic exudates put into the soil, supercharging the soil, and any nutrition that we've already got out there is already getting utilized, put in the roots, being shared with the cash crop. This is where efficiency really comes in, and we're going to talk about how it pays for itself here in a little bit. So when do I do this? So planting a cover crop, there's a lot of different, examples of what we can do. You can go too early and you can go too late, but there's a huge range of going in between. Now, a lot of it is how you guys manage. What are you going to do? Are you going to hedge? Do you want to prune? Do you want to shred it? Are you going to be doing sanitation? What are all these little details? And so we can help you with that. And every situation is going to be a little bit different. But we've had a lot of guys do winter sanitation right on top of planting the cover crop. They drive the shaker right on top of it. Doesn't always damage it too badly, depending on the growth stage that that cover crop is. If you've planted it way too early and you've got a lot of things coming up already and how wet that soil might be, you could damage it. But it's amazing how resilient a lot of those species are. They'll just pop right through, and within about a month to 2 months, you can't even tell which row that the shaker drove on. Very interesting. But other times you'll be able to see it. But it depends on the compaction that he's leaving in the field. Pistachios, we push that one way later because they don't bloom until way later, right? We're trying to match that time frame of when that field needs to be actively, when we're driving through it with sprayers. So there's a lot of variations that you can play with. We can help you with all those little details. That's not really a big concern for us, is the timing. But let's look at that and make those plans now so that we know going into it, so we're not surprised. Okay, now the management. This is where it can really get wild and fun because everybody has different opinions on how they want to manage the cover crop. I've had some growers manage the cover crop all the way up until about, 2 weeks before harvest. I've had other guys want to terminate it the first week in April. There's a big variation. So I'm not too concerned with all that. It all depends on what your risk is, what you want to learn out of this. And as you've done this after year after year after year, you'll gain the confidence to realize, you know what? I can push this a little bit further. And that's all right. So a few things with this. Rolling is another great way to terminate the cover crop. Now, we're going to try to play with some roller crimpers this year that are designed to actually take out cover crop rather than just using a ring roller, because that's been one of our, go-to tools. It's worked, it's been very effective, but it's a strategy. We're using that ring roller and a roller to actually terminate a lot of the really fast-growing brassicas at a certain growth stage, because those brassicas specifically will grow so quick in the month of March and so tall that it becomes a problem if you don't manage them, if you just kind of walk away from them. So we really got to be careful not to let things go too far. Now, rolling it over doesn't hurt a lot of the cereals or a lot of the legumes and some of the other broadleafs. They'll just come right back. So it looks like a completely different cover crop about 2 weeks after you've rolled it down. So there's a lot of interesting things to play with. And I think there's another graph that I'll show you that'll answer one of these questions of when to terminate. A lot of these species bring in carbon at different times, and their ratios change. And that's one of the most important things, is how do you manage the carbon to nitrogen ratio in the cover crop when you're terminating it? Because if you let that cover crop get too much age on it, that carbon content in the cover crop actually really goes high once it's gone to a vegetative state or a reproductive state. That reproductive state will have a lot of nitrogen demand to decompose itself. So it'll take nitrogen away from the actively growing cash crop. So we just got to manage that. And if we manage it at the right time, we break over the right species, we're not too concerned about that, but it's the right time. So what does this cost? Okay, for post-harvest nutrition, and these are really rough numbers. Reason why I threw it up here is you guys are probably curious. Not every operation, not every field, not every context is going to be the same. We still need to look at soils. We need to understand what your challenges are. Okay, are you a sodium challenged environment? I see Mark's going to hold me to my word. It's like, well, you said it was $17. So a lot of these things are going to be very important to look at your situation and what's happening. But these are just really rough ballpark numbers. And really what we're trying to achieve is, how do we make this plant, the tree specifically, as healthy as possible for next year's bloom? Setting it up and making sure that nutrients are in the right place so that bloom is going to go out of the gate and be consistent. So planting a cover crop. These are, again, rough numbers, but seed costs around the $32 per acre. It can be more, it can be less, but what we're really trying to achieve is the multi-species, wide spectrum of seeds that we're getting a lot of different things happening in the soil. Remember, diversity equals resilience. That is one of the most important things. So in-season cover crop management really depends on how we take care of it throughout the year, but just count on about 1, sometimes 2 extra mows. Everybody has different ways of doing it, and it also depends on how much rain we got. How much soil moisture, how actively growing was that cover crop? Because there's been times where it's like, wow, we didn't have to manage that any different than the field that was conventionally just sitting there. But then there's been other times where it's like, wow, we had a 6-foot cover crop and we wanted it to get to that point, but now we got to break it down, chop it up into pieces. So those are things to just be aware of. Okay, so the fun part. This is the question that most growers always ask, and it's an important one. How does this pay for itself? We're going to have some investment. We're going to look at spending money in different ways. But let's first talk about nutrition, right? This is always a difficult one to put a perfect ROI on, because there's so many factors that are going into this. So what we're looking at, and this is pretty much consistent with all permanent crops, is when you have the right nutrition, you're going to have a more consistent bloom. Who doesn't want a more consistent bloom? Any reasons? Nope. I think when we have a more uniform nut fruit development, we lead ourselves down the path of having a more consistent harvest. We have more consistent understanding of where things are actually maturing at. Management on nutrients is actually easier for us. The disease issues, the stress that the trees go through, there's a lot of things. If we can keep things consistent on the development side, the whole rest of the process works much better. So just example with almonds, a few years ago when we had some insane frosts in the 2018 timeframe, we had pretty much, it was the most obvious that I'd ever seen in almonds. We had 3 distinct bloom timings. So we had the stuff that was before the heavy frost, we had stuff that was happening during the frost, and we had the third bloom, the B team or the C team, that finally actually took after that late February timeframe. And so what we saw is we saw 3 different nuts on the tree. We saw the nuts that were the first set that really looked good. They were the best size. They looked most consistent. That's where we're getting like the 2022s, right? The really big ones. Then we also had the second phase, which was quite literally about 10 days after, and you could see it in the development of the crop. They were smaller, more inconsistent, and then the tree had enough energy to put out and actually keep that third bloom set going, and it was inconsistent. We had little ones, and those were the ones that were the stick tights. Those are the mummies. Those were outside the normal development of what that tree was processing and getting the nutrition out. So it's very interesting of how that works. So one of our goals is how do we nutritionally keep this consistent? So that's huge when you really look at sanitation, when you look at how much can you harvest. These are important things that we need to really pay attention. Better frost tolerance. This is a really interesting, there's a lot of interesting studies. There was one done on pistachios in Iran on higher nutrient content and how much more they can handle. So there's a few degrees of frost that they can handle without damage. Interesting to keep in mind. So in flower, the increased flower retention, more developed nuts, increased root flush during the spring. Wouldn't you rather have more roots to be able to capture everything? Yeah, Paul. Yep.
Green plant, it acts as a radiator to cool down and bring the dew out of the air.
Yep.
I'm just wondering that it said that having green understory makes frost worse.
So that was some research that was done in the early 80s. And what was interesting is there's been a few more studies since then that have actually shown that at the ground level, there is truth to that because of the radiant heating versus the buffering capacity of, a still soil versus capturing sunlight. Once you get about 3 feet and above, there's virtually no difference. And that's something that we actually took our own little temperature probes. You can get them off Amazon, and a few other places, but they're a little Bluetooth temperature probe, and they're actually pretty accurate. So what we did is we set them at different temperature, at different heights throughout orchards, clean floor, extremely big cover crop, and medium. And so what was interesting is on the ground level, you would see the difference by, 1 to 2 degrees or so. Once you get that 3, 5, and 10-foot range, there's virtually no difference inside the canopy. So that was really interesting to us. And then I know there's been some other studies that they've done more recently up in Tehama County on that same thing. So cover crops don't always affect the temperature like what we've been told. So that's a little bit of the wives' tale, but it is something to pay attention to and be fun. Do the same thing with Amazon. Buy those little temperature probes and put them out there. Prove to yourself that it actually works. So it's been fun to kind of show people those. So these are some of the most important questions, to answer right now is like, what are the top 3 statements that we hear from growers that really talk about, okay, what are these benefits from, proper nutrition, cover crops? How are we getting some value out of this? So people will say, hey, soil health, great. What does that mean? Every single person could have a different opinion on soil health. My job is not to define soil health. My job here is to show that soil health will increase revenue and save you money. So a few of those things. So trees look better during stress events. We've seen that pretty consistently to where our mite pressure is much lower than anybody else that has clean, bare fields. So that's often saved an entire miticide application on trees, which, how much does a miticide cost right now? Anybody want to volunteer that information for almonds specifically? probably about 35 to 40 bucks. So if you don't have to do that, plus the application, whatever you want to charge yourself for that. So that's a huge increase right there. And that's something that we'll see in year 1 of application or putting a cover crop in. So that's huge. The other thing that I wanted to talk a lot more about, but I don't think I'll have the time, is Andrew gave me a whole bunch of really good photos of his little laser thermometer showing soil temperatures. I know both Keith and Monte have talked about that, but that is something that I would encourage all of you guys to go on Amazon again. It's like I should be paid by Jeff Bezos right now for always saying, get this on Amazon. But the thing that, is really interesting is get that laser thermometer, have that in your truck with you, get soil temperature readings, because at 100 degrees, you'd be amazed how much of the water that you have in the soil is just evaporating and not going into the tree. So if I remember right, roughly at 100-degree soil temperature in that top inch or so, you're losing about 85% to evaporative losses, and only 15% of the water is actually getting into the plant. And then as that goes deeper, obviously you guys have all had shovels and checked soil moisture and temperatures. The deeper you go, it's going to get cooler. But you still think if your top inch is 130, 140 degrees, that conductance goes all the way through. Biology doesn't like that. It dies, doesn't cycle the nutrition. The water evaporates, microbes don't hold on to it. So there's a tremendous amount of loss when we don't have that soil coverage and that protection of that mitigated temperature. Temperature is huge. Rain harvesting. Keith talked a little bit about this. How do we improve water infiltration? Massively important. We have seen time after time an orchard, huge rain. We get them in really big chunks every once in a while where it's like 2 inches in a 24-hour period. It's like, wow. Well, fields that have cover crop on it actually keep all that in. It goes in. We don't have return ponds that are having to run for an entire day or two. That makes a lot of difference. We're actually getting a lot of that fresh rainwater to go into the profile, push sodiums, push a lot of the other salts down so that we have a cleaner soil profile, so that in spring, when we all are putting on nutrition and we want that plant to start growing, it's a cleaner soil profile. We essentially flush the toilet of all the garbage that we put on it with poor water quality from the well. So that's a huge value. And depending on what your value of water is, it's 150 bucks an acre foot when you look at pumping costs, R&M on the well, or if you're paying that much from a district. If you can apply less water because of your salt issues, not having to leach as much because you got more rainwater in, especially in the beginning of the season, that makes a huge difference. So what does 2 acre inches cost you when you start doing that? 20 bucks, 30 bucks, even more than that on a drought year. So those are just other dollar values that we can look at. Increased nutrient efficiency, applying less fertilizer. Monte talked a lot about this. How are we improving our efficiencies in the soil? That is actually pretty simple because we just let a lot of the biology take care of it for us. We're not really managing them intensely, although we can, but it's amazing when you let things go and you let things do what they're supposed to do, and you just macro manage them instead of micromanage, this biology really is pretty effective. We've seen nitrogen rates going from that typical 250 to up to 300 unit, where those guys have done a lot. We progressively get those guys down to the 200 mark to even the 100. And there's certain situations where we're actually only 60 units of applied nitrogen and still have excessive nitrogen in the plant tissue. Let the biology work for you. There's a lot of these things that if you just watch and observe and test, that is a key component. So here's just a bunch of other benefits. I'm not going to put a dollar value to any of them right now because you probably can. So a case study, I'll fly through this real quick. As you guys know, Westside has a lot of really challenging water conditions, high sodium, high chloride, high boron, high anything that you don't want in your tree. But we played with cover crops. And so back in 2021 of January, we flew on cover crops into these pistachios. So instead of planting it, instead of using our drills, instead of doing that, it's just flew it on right before a really big rainstorm. Let the rain beat it in. And we had the history, so 2019, 2020, and then we didn't have anything for the 21 year, but for the fall of 22, so these are all fall samplings. We saw a huge decrease. So you can see how all of these numbers are naturally going up, every single one of them. So not cover crop, not cover crop. This is cover crop. Same thing with the sodium, not cover cropped, not cover cropped, cover cropped. You guys see a pattern here? Thought that was very interesting. So what's the value of getting sodium and decreasing your ECs in your soil? That's massively important. Same thing with row crops. So we were doing the same kind of thing, but in fallow ground, open ground. So we had a lot more conventional fields. All of these were bare fields, typical west side where you drive in the wintertime and there's nothing. And then we have one field cover crop on both the EC number and the sodium. Do you see another pattern? Every year they're going up. Cover crop was the only one that went down. These things aren't coincidences. These aren't just situations where we're pulling a sample and saying, I hope it's good. These are actual numbers that we're being able to change the soil profile of the sodium content, the EC. These are major nutrients and soil chemistry that are affecting fertilizer efficiency. So anything we can do to help improve efficiency is massively important. So this is just kind of what we're looking at as far as what it looked like when we fly on. And these are during years where it's drought. We don't have a lot of rain. Remember, some of these areas only get 3 to 6 inches of rain. Whereas in this area, we might get, 9 to 14, 30 inches in some spots. Well, more like 20 to 25, right? So depending on where your rain status is, it makes a big difference. So you'll see the emitters right there. Pretty interesting. So we're just using goats or sheep to graze a lot of this down. And that's what it looks like after they've grazed. So the more actively growing cover crop that we can get, the better off we are. So to answer one of the questions here, so how do I deal with land IQ? So a lot of the satellite imagery, how are we kind of correcting that? So a lot of the districts, a lot of the GSAs that we know have this land IQ or different satellite imagery that's calculating ETs that are not actually based on actual ETs. They're just running it through an algorithm. A lot of the GSAs are having the option now to where you can say, I want to contest that and I want to run off of my meter. Not all of them. There's, I don't know how many different GSAs we as a company get to interact with, where we've got customers and some amazing GSAs and some horrible GSAs. But one of the key things is they're seeing a pattern and people are actually showing this number where, hey, you said I used 42 inches of water. My flow meters on this block show that I only used 32 inches. So they're seeing massive variations, 42 to 32 inches. That's a pretty big swing from a calculated ET to an actual flow rate. So I would guess over the next year or so that this will be continued to be fought over, will be continued to be challenged, and we'll probably see, ET models change. But one of the key things is we continue to need to make a voice, and I'm continuing to interact with these people, but we all need to stick together and say, hey, what does my flow meter say? And what does your satellite imagery show? Because there's a massive difference. We need to be able to prove that. So keep track of your flow meters. We can help you with that, because what we see is all of this green that you see, it's amazing. It does not use excessive amounts of water. Now it is using water, but also at the same time, we're capturing more water. So we're positively adding more water into the system, where other systems are actually evaporating water even in the middle of winter. Interesting. So yeah, and I think one of the key things is, how do we keep actively growing roots even at the same time of right before harvest? That's something that I would challenge a lot of us to think about, even in the almond side of everything. How can we keep actively growing roots? So in a perfect world, land IQ can't see the centers, right? Or they'll see the centers, but not see the berm. So can we hide our berms underneath the trees, right? Can we farm underneath the canopy? That is yet to be determined. That's another challenge, but it's amazing the efficiency when you have multi-species working together, how they share water. And that's something that Keith has done with a SAR grant, and I think I've showed that number last year and even the year before. But more multi-species means more water use efficiency. And that's something that we can talk about later. but it's very interesting to see how this works. So real quick, I'm going to finish with the last 2 slides here because I think these are really important action steps that we all need to take. Is when we look at all of this, let's look at soil testing. We have standard chemistry soil tests that we can look at. Okay, what nitrogen levels do you currently have? What are all these different levels? Keith mentioned the total nutrient digestion. That's a really interesting one. Sometimes blows your mind. Some of our soils have, 20,000 up to 30,000 parts per pounds per acre of potassium. And here we are pounding potassium on in soils that you kind of scratch your head. It's like, wow. So how do we improve our efficiency, right? Just incremental steps. We're not going to get all, complete supplementation 100% right away, but we're going to be in steps, right? So make a step towards the right direction. So we can help with that. And then also looking at how do we sit down and just make a nutrition plan for next year, right? Planning for next year happens right now. Looking at the sap sampling, look at tissue sampling. How do we look at our nutrition for next year? And how are we getting indicators that are going to tell us, hey, your Brix levels are in the right area? What can we do to influence Brix in season? Our old tissue versus our new tissue, comparing those. So out of curiosity, who is aware or knows what sap sampling is in the room? Cool, we got a few. I would love to educate everybody about it. I think that's a time that we can do that in the future. But sap sampling is probably one of the most effective ways to understand what's happening in the plant nutritionally at that moment during the growth season, and understanding what nutrients do you really need and what nutrients influence each other. That can be done next spring. So another lunch and learn to be held. So, and I think I'm going to skip through all of this because I can go one-on-one with a lot of you guys and really talk about some of the things that are important. But I think the biggest thing that I want you guys to kind of come away with is making changes. We all have to make changes here in the next few years, next 5 years, next 10 years. One thing that I can guarantee is nothing is going to be like what it was 5 years ago. We're not going to have the same amount of water. We're not going to have the same regulations. We're going to have less water, more regulations. We all know that, right? We don't need to beat that drum too hard. We know what state we live in. We all like to hear when someone else brags about how amazing their state is and, no problems at all, right? But we realize that California is always going to be the best place to grow a lot of these crops. We have amazing weather. We have amazing things that we can do. So how are we all going to stay here? How are we going to make an opportunity for the next generation? I think that's an important thing to make a very clear distinction of why are we doing this? Why are we farming? Do we want to just farm for the moment, farm for the profit? Yeah, we need to be able to stay in business. But what are the things that are even larger than that? It goes back to the statement of, I don't have that slide, but it goes back to the family, right? What are we doing for our family, for our communities, taking care of the soil that's going to increase the plant vitality, a healthier plant, which makes a healthier food. This is a process, right? These problems didn't happen overnight, and we're not going to solve these problems overnight, but we sure can make a difference one day at a time. So my challenge to all of you would be, take your operation, evaluate the things that you do. What are the things that, really made an impact today with what both Monte and Keith have said? What was it that, made them, resonate with you? They have personal experience of why they've gone down these paths. What's going to be your story on why you changed? Why did you do less herbicide? Why did you do less fungicide? Why did you change a strategy? These are going to be parts of your story. So in the future, when you can look back and you say, wow, my efficiency improved. I'm creating a better quality product. I'm doing something better than what I did. That's going to put you in a better financial position in the future. Because if we continue to do what we have been doing in the past, we're going to run ourselves into the ground. Not just physically, emotionally exhausted, just spiritually exhausted. Every single level, we're going to be exhausted. So we have to be thinking about new ways to do this. And so I really want this quote to sink in. I want everybody to think about diligently looking and preparing for a discovery. Be in your field, look at it. Do something that's going to be a little bit outside of the box of what makes you uncomfortable. Do something that's going to challenge yourself. Don't do the same plan that you've been doing. Do something a little bit different. We'd love to help you with that. So sit with somebody, talk to a CAS agronomist, ask questions, talk to other people who have been doing this a while. There's a lot of people in this room who've been doing this for many, many, many years. They've learned a lot. They've been challenged. They've learned, but they've not given up, right? No doubt we've all had our days where it's like, "Ugh, what am I doing?" But we've also learned what things we're probably not going to do again so that we can make better movement in the future. So with that, that's the slide I was looking for. But yeah, memorize that because this is the reason of why we do what we do here at CAS. And you can adopt this idea and this principle because we can change things, and it starts with the soil. So I think that's it.